Today on the Criss Cinema Podcast, we'll be discussing Flightplan and Alfred Hitchcock's The Lady Vanishes, similarities, differences, and why Hitchcock is responsible for both. On the Criss Cinema Podcast.
Two fellows meet accidentally, like you and me. No connection between them at all. Never saw each other before. They swap murders. Criss.
Wilson! I'm sorry, Wilson! A day may come when the courage of men fails, but it is not this day.
You gotta keep breathing, because tomorrow the sun will rise. Who knows what the tide could bring?
Hello and welcome to the Criss Cinema Podcast, where we weave in and out of cinema history and find connections you may have never recognized. We will always review at least one movie, but today is our special Criss episode where we're reviewing two. 2005's Flightplan and Alfred Hitchcock's The Lady Vanishes from 1938. Hi, my name is Aaron Wilson. I'm a filmmaker learning my craft.
And my name is Mark Clovis. I am a person who just happens to really like movies and the histories in which they're set.
If you like what you hear today, please support our Patreon at patreon.com/Transcend Entertainment. That's TRANSCEND Entertainment. Okay. So, what movies have you been watching recently?
Well, I haven't really been watching movies lately. I have spent the past few days doing a deep dive into Brooklyn Nine-Nine because with the recent passing of Andre Braugher,
nice.
I've really been. I watched some of it when it was on, and I always enjoyed his performance. And it's just coming back to it, and maybe this is with the, given the context, I'm just fascinated by how much of the performances hinge around his. Like he feels like it's always like a linchpin. And oh my gosh, his comic timing just really stands out. He is so good at this deadpan delivery. He knows just when to do it. It's so difficult to imagine how they could have had as great of a show, even with that awesome cast.
He's kind of the foil for the whole thing.
Oh my gosh, and he is so good at it. And I've also been reading a novel called Wheel Spins, which, as we'll find, is going to be relevant to what we're talking about here. So, but that's really been about it. I haven't been to the theater since I saw Godzilla -1. How about you? What have you been watching lately?
I've been watching Twilight Zone, original Twilight Zone.
Oh wow.
Black and white one.
It's so funny you should mention that because I was thinking when I was watching Flightplan how much it reminded me of an episode from the most recent Twilight Zone, which admittedly I haven't seen all the way through, but I keep thinking of the parallels, but I imagine we'll get to that a little bit later on.
Yeah, I've seen a couple episodes of it. The thing I love about it is, of course there's the Twilight Zone-y stuff, but it kind of takes you back to an older era. Kind of that and Andy Griffith Show are the two ones that I watch if I'm too stressed. And just in the middle of the day, and it's like, no, I need to eat lunch and watch this, and it's great for that. And then you get some fun Twilight Zone-y stuff in there too.
Oh yes, so. And it's so fascinating. I have this idea in my mind that someday there should be a book written about how the Twilight Zone, the classic Twilight Zone especially, really gets into the zeitgeist of the 50s and 60s. Concerns about nuclear war, concerns about the obsolescence of humans. And the funny thing is that you can watch a show like that and it is as relevant today as it was 60, 70 years ago in a way that you really can't say about a lot of shows. I mean, not to say they weren't great shows, not to say they don't have a great nostalgic value like Andy Griffith, but Twilight Zone is some of those episodes. It's just like, that you could change, the sets and the context, but it's universal in a way that not so many shows just really can't achieve.
I've heard Rod Sterling, someone that was saying, "Oh, you're not going to make serious TV anymore," and they just didn't get it. Like it's an allegorical thing, and I think that disconnecting it from the serious issue makes it more universal and timeless, like you were saying.
Not to mention, I think that you're getting at there the sort of the barrier that show had to cross back then for a lot of people because people thought of science fiction as, especially on television, as for kids. I mean, you had like your Captain Video and you had your
Flash Gordon,
exactly, and all those shows which were like, okay, this is, we're going to do it for the kids. We're going to have the cheap sets, but the kids aren't going to realize they're cheap because, they're kids and therefore dumb. Yeah. And so I think that you get that notion of seriousness. And he came from that seriousness background. Requiem for a Heavyweight. I mean, he was such a great writer. And and I think he recognized you could do things in science fiction that you can't do on modern media, and yet,
Right.
and I think that's part of the key to its universality. He's offering a commentary that is still, for better and for worse,
Valid today.
yeah, exactly. In a way that had he tried doing it without the science fiction context, he probably would have had, network standards saying, you can't talk about this, we're going to lose it, advertisers.
Yeah,
Ah."
that's exactly why I did it. Yeah. The commercial for, I'm not going to say something because I don't want to get, if we ever get a sponsor for one of them.
Yes,
Anyway,
yeah,
but-
we were very good to our hypothetical sponsors.
Yes.
We love and cherish them, and we'll praise them to the stars because we know they deserve it.
Okay, so now the lady vanishes. While traveling by train, a young socialite is befriended by a charming yet enigmatic older woman. However, when the woman disappears, the other passengers deny she ever existed. Okay, this was a good movie.
My first question, had you seen the movie before we did this?
I had not. Well, I actually saw it because of your recommendation. We had a conversation about Hitchcock's filmography, and this came up in it, and I'd never seen that one. I've seen a lot of Hitchcock movies because I'm a Hitchcock buff. I mean, that's an understatement, but
I mean,
Yeah.
I like Hitchcock. I've not really seen all of his films. There's still so many
Right.
out there that are very important and very famous that I've yet to get to. This is one of the ones I had done a dive on about, here I'm showing my age, a couple decades ago. And I had watched it and I enjoyed it. I saw so many fascinating things with it. And then it stuck with me and I never really got back to it. In a
Yeah.
way, there's so much Hitchcock that I love revisiting. I love revisiting North by Northwest. That is
oh, that's the best.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I just can watch that and just enjoy it. I always find myself returning to 35 Steps. Or
39 steps. Yeah, those
39 Steps. Yeah,
those two are actually remakes, rough
Yes.
or loose remakes.
which is very fitting for what we do. Might even have to.
Yeah,
maybe return
yeah. I
to
was
both.
going to bring that up. We should compare those at some point.
So.
Also, Saboteur.
Mm-hmm.
Either Saboteur or not Sabotage. It's the Saboteur.
I think Saboteur.
Yeah.
That is one of those I have not seen. So I'm going to go ahead and bank that one and save it for it, so I come to it
Yeah.
fresh and with
Yeah, that'll be
with
great.
wide open perspective. So
Yeah, so let's get into the story of The Lady Vanishes. So it opens on this avalanched town in the middle of this non-existent country in Europe, and there's an avalanche blocking the train from going through, and we start in this hotel with a bunch of British visitors who, they're stuck there.
yeah. In the opening, I really like, and this is something I'd mentioned before we began, which was how I love the way you kind of come in on it, and it reminded me when I was watching it of it's like the Mr. Rogers opening.
Yeah.
In which case you're kind of gradually zooming in, and it all looks very artificial. I mean, it's
Yeah.
it kind of
They actually have there's two little animated guys in there.
a little car
And I-
going. Yeah. It's like something. I once had toy trains, and it reminded me of that. It's kind of like the thing
Right.
that you love about toy trains, how you can sort of animate the scene. That's what it's like. And there's this, and you nowadays you think with CGI you could easily do something better, and yet maybe that's what Hitchcock was trying to do, because there's this whole element of artificiality, fantasy to it all.
Yeah.
And I think that's when he does that setting, the way that he does it. One other thing I want to mention, while the country is made up, and they do mention its name in there, it's like Ruritania, Latveria, or something like
Yeah,
that.
something.
They do two things that one, they specify that it is Central Europe. And they do that later on with the Gilbert character. And that matters in terms of the context, because you read The Wheel Spins, which nowadays they simply reprint as The Lady Vanishes. And it's the same basic plot is there. But the context is very different. Ethelina White, who wrote the novel I think it was published in 1936, and it's a very straightforward English mystery of the era, and whereas you watch the movie and it is very political. I mean, it doesn't really call out places by specific names. I think that because at
Yeah.
the time they had to think about international audiences and selling the movie because it wasn't quite a war yet.
Generic soldiers at the end. It's
Exactly.
clear what country they're from.
Yeah, I mean, you can't quite. I mean, sometimes you can hear a language you recognize, and then sometimes it's like Gellerese, and we're just gonna. Blah, 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 blah. It's but if you accept the fact that it's Central Europe, then you start seeing it becomes the political themes
Yeah.
become a bit more.
Implications.
Yeah, exactly, the political implications are very much there.
And it actually, for people who don't know, this was made in 1938, which historically was right before World War II. Or?
Yes, 1938 was sort of the crisis year for appeasement. You had, for one thing, you had the Spanish Civil War going on, and that is something they never reference it directly in the movie, but they imply it in that wonderful scene early on when you first meet Charters in Caldecott, and they're talking about the dangerous situation. I mean, you realize you discover quickly that they are not talking about international politics, but the Spanish Civil War is ongoing. You have this clash that's taking place between the Republicans, the nationalists, and they're being supported by the communist Soviet Union, and you're getting the Italy and Germany supporting the nationalists, and you also have at the beginning of the year you have the annexation of Austria. And then you have the Munich crisis, the German threat to take over Czechoslovakia, and how all this is basically averted by appeasement. And that's something that is alluded to later in the movie, not with specific reference, contrary to what some people think. But there is nonetheless this sense of, the English are trying to stay aloof.
It's the backdrop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what you're seeing there, and this gets to why I find it such a fascinating film to talk about, is that there is this political subtext that the nationalism is very much there.
Yeah, and this is a part of the movie I was completely unaware of because I don't know the history of this. But
I'm happy to return to it later on, but it's very much there, and it's very much what the viewers, especially the English viewers, would have recognized when they were watching it in 1938.
Cool. Okay, let's get to the story. Okay, let me start with my frustration about the first act. The first couple times I watched it, I had no idea what to make of it because I'm a filmmaker and I wanted to break it down like structurally, which means kind of the way you build a house. The first act is the setup, and you got to know what you're setting up. And there's so many pieces, so many different people. It feels like a murder mystery at the beginning.
Yes.
And you're like, okay. And it kind of is, at least the first act is they set it up. I think this is why they do it, because it's like, who is the lady that's going to vanish is the question. Because they start with three ladies walking in, and that's the question, who's going to vanish?
Yeah.
It's got to be three of them,
them.
or one of them three. Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Spoiler.
Nice misdirection.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry.
No, it's fine. But yeah, by the end of that, though, one of those ladies ends up being the main character.
I get the frustration because when you first have the scene inside the lobby, and there's just so many people. Yeah, and it really is a microcosm of Europe because there are all these languages, and you have the guy at the front who's trying to navigate it all, and that's where you get the introduction.
Yeah, I love that guy. What do you call it? Concierge?
The concierge or the head desk guy. I can't remember.
Yeah. Okay, this is a nitpick, but I hate how the lady that ends up being the main character, ends up correcting him for the way he says avalanche. He's like, it's avalanche. It's like, are you kidding me?
and that's one of the things. That's another thing I found interesting about the movie is that, I find this a little bit in the novel itself, which is, nowadays we talk about the ugly American, and we talk about how Americans are abroad, and this film is kind of a reminder that before there was the ugly American, there was the ugly
British.
Yeah, exactly. They go around and talk about how and this actually plays into later in the film in the climax, which is the idea that things should be done a certain English way. There's actually a line in the novel which captures this, which sort of the English see themselves as the policemen of the world. It gets to it doesn't exactly foreshadow what's going to happen in the world, in the decades to come, but it does kind of get to this England versus the world, or in this case, it's England versus Europe, which is
English versus everyone else.
Exactly,
Yeah.
which is kind of a mentality that we still see at play today.
Right.
But that gets to two of the most prominent characters in the movie, which are Charters and Caldecott. And the thing you read the novel, they're not in the novel. What they were a replacement for these spinsters who are in the novel and who are they're kind of these very judgmental middle-aged English ladies, and they're not missed for me,
Right.
Because Charters and Caldecott are so charming, and they become so famous
Mhm.
that they end up bringing them back in other movies.
Oh, really?
They end up
I didn't
having
know
a
know
TV
about
show.
that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why I tend to look back, and granted, I'm reading back upon this. They sort of are the most English of the English.
Yeah, these guys talk about cricket the whole time, and that's
Oh, yes.
the only thing they care about. Like, to the point where we'll get to this, but anyway.
And that's where, and I love how that's set up in the script. And this is something about the story, is that apparently Hitchcock inherited this. He was looking for a project. They had.
Oh yeah, I read that.
Yeah, they had lined this up. So I don't know if what he tweaked versus what was there, but you had that wonderful. We first meet Charters and Caldecott, and they're talking about England at the brink, and you think that, wow, the international situation is ominous, and they seem so worried, and it's like, wow, are we about to see some sort of international crisis? And then you realize a couple scenes later they're talking about the England versus Austria match.
Oh yeah, I didn't even piece that together.
Yeah. So it's like you initially it's like a misdirection.
Right.
And it's a misdirection that exposes exactly what you were talking about, which is that these are two people, and this plays into the movie, because when you get to the second act, and Iris Henderson, the protagonist, is trying to convince people of what she knows to be true, that Charters basically does her dirty.
Yeah, that's what I was referencing. And
Yeah.
the next point, they care so much about cricket, they don't want to miss their match, and so they stop her from stopping the train. Because
Exactly.
they don't even care one way or the other if the lady actually vanished. They just, yeah.
And that's where you get to, I think, that commentary, the frustration with England sort of seeing itself as on the sidelines, unwilling to step in, that they're so concerned with their own internal frivolities that
Right.
they aren't willing to do what's right. And I think whether that was overt or if that's something that can maybe be read in, it was kind of subconscious. I don't know which is the case, but it's very much there, and it's not just Charters and Caldecott. It's some of the other ones as we'll get to.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Those two characters, structure-wise, I come at this from a storytelling place because, of course, I'm a filmmaker. I don't know what purpose they filled, or I didn't know what purpose they filled until a certain point, but it is that scene, and we're jumping forward, but we already talked about it, where they pretend they didn't see her.
Yes.
And that's what that does for us is, well, we'll get there. We got to have some more context for this before we get to that.
And just to really reference before we move on to the other characters, is that it's not just that they pretend not to have seen Miss Froy on the train.
Mm-hmm.
They meet her in the hotel.
Yeah, they do.
And so, I mean, and this is where, I don't want to reference the novel too much, but that's one of the key differences, is that in the novel, there is an implication or, that the only person who really has met Miss Froy is Iris.
And jumping forward just a little bit, that's kind of what they do, the approach of Flightplan. But yeah.
Yes. But so it's more understandable that perhaps that they're not willing to go along with, her claim. But here, I mean, Charters and Caldecott know this woman. She was trying to befriend them.
Right.
And
And they're pretending they have no idea.
They're kind of jerks.
Yeah, they're very much jerks. So let's just jump forward to that because, yeah, the first act is kind of hard to cover.
Well,
but unless there's more in the first act that you want to cover.
Well, there's one other person I want to talk about before we get to the setup, which is the Todd Hunters, because they're playing a relatively minor role, and yet it's one that kind of underscores how selfish so many of the English characters are.
Mhm.
Because
The what?
the Todd Hunters,
Todd, what is that?
they,
I don't remember.
they were introduced as the husband and wife. But
Oh,
you
okay.
discover
Right.
later on they're
She's a mistress. Yeah.
yeah, not just mistress, that they're having an affair,
Yeah.
and that they both have spouses
Oh, right.
in England. And there's that great scene in the middle where initially the Mrs. Todd Hunter, and for those of you who don't have mystical vision, I use air quotes there.
Right.
The where she initially backs up Iris and says, "Oh yes, I saw Mrs. Froy," and then she goes back in, and her paramour says, "Well, you think that's because she wants to use this again. She's not because she's doing this because it's the right thing. She's hoping to leverage it so she can get Tom Hunter to divorce his wife and marry her." And he's like, "Well, this will get your husband to divorce you, but I'm not going to divorce my wife." And then what does she do? She goes along with the deception that subsequently takes place because she suddenly realizes it's not in her interest to do the right thing.
Right. And we'll visit that more when we get to that part. I've got a big part on that.
Go ahead.
Let's cover beginning of Act 2. So they get on the train. Well, right before they get on the train, a brick falls from the top of the building and it lands on her head.
Oh, it's not a brick. It's a fire.
Oh, right.
And there's this interesting question: was it accidental, or was it aimed at Miss Froy?
Oh, yeah. I got that impression that it was aimed at Miss Froy because she was the one there.
Then you're more perceptive than I am because I've seen the film like 4 or 5 times at this point. I still missed that.
And watching it on second viewings, I also was wondering who is the guy that's pushing it off.
Yes.
And I think it's either you should have watched this. And we had a spoiler warning, so here we go. The doctor, I think it's either him or the magician guy. I'm pretty sure it would be the magician. Doesn't really matter, though. Somebody does it. Mm-hmm. But, yeah. So then she gets on the train, and they have this great shot of, it's a visual effect spectacular for the time of this swirling thing, and it's got, multiple copies of her friends waving by, and it's all spinning. And depicting that she got bumped on the head, and then it cuts to the wheels of the train spinning.
Yeah,
it's a great shot, and then it goes inside the train, and I believe this is what they either.
Well,
yeah.
Initially, she wakes up in the cabin with the Baroness and the Italian magician and and Miss Froy, and this is where she actually gets to know Miss Froy.
Yeah, this is where they actually meet. And I love the way they set up on second viewings, the confusion went away of the structure of the first act. Let's see if I can break this down simple enough. Okay, so it starts with a bunch of different characters, the least important characters first. And then as it goes forward, it narrows it down to the 2 main leads, the music man that's upstairs playing the stuff, and
Gilbert, yes, and
yeah, Gilbert,
the ethnomusicologist, and the fact that he's an ethnomusicologist becomes pretty convenient at the end.
Yeah, very convenient. And then the Isis is the main character, and she's
Iris.
Iris. Yeah, I don't remember main characters' names. It's just that's the person you're watching on the screen. The lady in Flightplan, her name is Kyle, and I'm like, I was reading the description, and it's like, Kyle? What? Thought it was a dude. Anyway, so
Iris meets Miss Froy formally when they're on the train. They had the encounter at the hotel when they're initially bonding over Gilbert's clarinet playing, which and I want to just go back to this briefly, is interfering Miss Froy with this very important task that she's trying to do. Because you have the troubadour outside who's singing the particular song.
Yeah.
And that turns out to be the
and this will be the MacGuffin through line.
An audio MacGuffin shot, if you were.
Yeah, you don't know what it is until the end, but you hear that song and you see her. What does she do? She just listens to it.
Remember, you can see her kind of moving her hand like she's trying to remember the rhythm. And then, of course, you have that ominous, the troubadour singing, and all of a sudden these hands come from behind him and yank him off, and you don't see him no more.
And then, of course, the lady vanishes.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
real quick, because I
Yeah.
think this is going to matter for the other one. You do have when they're having tea. Firstly,
Oh, right. That's important. Yeah.
They walk to the dining car. They Mrs. the posing as Mrs. Todner. She sees them, and then they're in you have the scene with the window, the fogging.
Yeah. This is amazing storytelling right here.
And it's one, of course, that we're going to have a callback to in Flightplan.
Yeah.
But then you also have.
I'm going to cover that real good. That's yeah.
But then you also have where at one point there you have Miss Freud saying I have the specialty. She gives it to the waiter, and then she doesn't have sugar, and so there's Charters and Caldecott, and they're talking about cricket, and she interrupts this in discussion where they're using the sugar as the 11, and she's like, I need some sugar.
That was great.
And so it's again, so Charters and Caldecott, they know who this woman is. They have
interacted with her multiple times,
and now they're interacting with her again. It's not like with Mrs. Todner, which is a passing clip. They're actually interacting with her, which kind of doubles down on the jerkiness of what they do later.
They just don't care.
Yeah, because it's not that they just don't care. She interrupted a cricket discussion.
Yeah, I love how important they think cricket is.
Yes.
Every single interaction, they get offended that everybody else doesn't think it's so. As important as they do. So she vanishes, and this is where the suspense starts. Mm-hmm. And okay, let me give a rundown on what suspense is real quick. I've got a video if you want to check out our YouTube channel, and you might be on there because you're playing it on there. But check out my Facets of Story Suspense 101 if you want to get more in depth into this. So suspense basically is just we know more than the main character does. And the effect that has on the audience, well, we'll get into it with the example. So the way he does that is after the lady vanishes, she goes around looking around, and she can't find her anywhere, just talking to everybody that she's met before and asking if they've seen her. And then this is where it comes in. Well, we talked about it before. The first one is where the two cricket guys, can't remember their names.
Charters and Caldecott.
Right. They hide in the bathroom because they don't want to tell them, they don't want to miss their game. And so that's suspense. We know that she's not crazy. And so it makes that thing of, she starts to think she's more and more crazy. And the more crazy she thinks she is, the more we're like, no, you're not crazy. She's right there type thing. That's suspense. When you want to yell something or like grab the main character by the lapels and be like, no, do this. That's suspense.
You especially want to do it because when you, and this goes back to what I was talking about earlier, is that the selfishness of all the characters is spelled out. So she's talking to Charters and Caldecott, and they're like, what Englishwoman? And then afterwards they're saying, whoa, we don't want to stop the train. We'll miss the match. And then you have,
And then it goes to the judge and the mistress.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know their names.
I think his name is Todd Hunter, and she's simply posing as Mrs. Todd Hunter.
Right.
And how initially because he doesn't want to get involved in any sort of investigation or scandal.
And jumping back real quick, I just have to point this out. The very beginning, after they introduce the three ladies, she's the very next lady that's introduced, and she has like this black, big fancy hat, and they have this shot of her, and it's telling you, oh, this is the lady. And it's not.
Yeah, she sure has to be. This is her most consequential moment. Is she is sitting there about to she's sitting there initially supporting Iris, and then you start to see the.
Well, okay,
go ahead.
Let's go in sequence here. So, first of all, they talk to the judge outside, and she's in there, so that she's not overhearing this. But the judge tells them they didn't see her, and then he goes in and he's like, I totally saw her. Not the dialogue, but then she's like, she gets angry about that. And I'll let you take it from there.
So they're walking through, and you're seeing, so then if she's wrong and there is no Miss Freud because nobody is supporting her story, then what must it be? And this is where you get Dr. Hartz.
Right.
And Dr. Hartz is played by Paul Lucas, and he goes on to win an Oscar in a few years for Watch on the Rhine.
Very much deserved, at least
yes.
from this performance.
Oh yeah, I mean he's so good. He reminds me.
You
a lot-
believe him the whole time.
Oh yeah, you do.
Yeah.
He's very. And this is this theme, and I think this is a theme that we see as well in Flightplan. You have these people who, at first glance, are authority.
Right.
And it's interesting how you never see anybody of authority on the train in the way that you do in, say, like Murder on the Orient Express, where there is like a somebody who's a conductor, somebody who is providing authority. The authority comes from Dr. Hartz,
Right.
and to a lesser degree, the Baroness. And Dr. Hartz, he's introduced. He's kindly, he's sympathetic, but he's also, as a doctor, he has that authority that comes with.
And he's charming too. That's
He's very
the
charming.
thing.
He's got that elegance, he's got that carriage, and he's saying, well, maybe it's for these reasons, and so you're seeing him sowing the doubts, and that's the thing I find fascinating about the structure is that the more the story sharpens for the audience, the more it gets befuddled for her.
Right.
And-
Yeah, that's the suspense element. The dichotomy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean now
Hitchcock knows what he's doing.
Oh, he does, and then you get the stop, and this is where I feel like there's a plot hole, because when they stop and you see because Hartz is on the train because he is going to his clinic and they're picking up a passenger along the way, and so you have the passenger coming on, and by this point Iris has Gilbert helping her. Although he doesn't believe her,
Right.
There's they've had kind of a meet cute and
Yeah, she kind of hates him, and they hate each other.
Yeah.
It's a very much hate to love arc for them.
Yeah. But he's humoring her. He's trying to help her out. But I don't get why they didn't simply offload Miss Freud, apart from the narrative need to keep her on the train. Is that why they didn't just simply offload her? And I thought about that.
Oh yeah.
Later when you get
That was
to
a good point.
the baggage car. And
Well, maybe it is that they need the information that she has.
well, they might, but the imperative for them is to get Miss Freud off the car
Right.
before anybody else, or off the train, before anybody else is aware of what's going on. And
Yeah, they could just get off with her.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not like as though they don't have. I mean, when you get to the baggage car and you find that there's the vanishing cabinet, all these ways they could have gotten her off without anybody noticing. But no, instead that you have this ruse, which is true to the novel, where you're going to have someone who is bandaged up because they've been in this horrific accident, and we can't take the bandages off because it's just all lumps of flesh, and how. But that's the point which they might have been able to ease her off the train, but they don't, which of course gives us the rest of Act 2 and Act 3.
Right.
So, of course, I think this isn't made clear. The person who is ostensibly bandaged up when they get on the train, she I think becomes the fake Miss Freud, the Madame Cooper.
Oh, I didn't connect. Oh, that would make sense because there'd be a loose body that's I never connected that.
So they smuggle her onto the train, and they do a switcheroo, and
then they switch her back at the end. The
Exactly.
good guys.
And I love that serendipity about how
Right.
and how that plays out. So, but they get to the point where they're sowing the seeds in Iris, and this is where I feel the film doesn't do as much as they do. It just I couldn't quite. Yeah, I must confess I had this problem with the novel itself. I couldn't quite get the impression that Iris was really in that fog. I mean, she's had a blow to the head.
Yeah.
And she seemed a little too determined early on, and I think that was I think her name was Margaret Lockwood, the actress. I mean, she has a great performance, but she's much more. She's doing a better job, I think, of selling her determination to find Miss Freud, her anxiety about Miss Freud than she is.
It may be that the hit on the head. I mean, because the hit on the head wasn't really the cause, so maybe it wasn't as severe as they thought, and it's a reason for everybody else to assume, oh, she's got a hit on the head, she's hallucinating.
That's a good. I hadn't considered the degree to which that they interpret her as
Right.
she's been hurt and that's being sold, and then they come so close to convincing her that she might be wrong, and then what does she see? She sees the name that Miss Freud wrote in the glass, which conveniently vanishes the moment that it confirms for
Right.
Iris.
Yeah, that's perfect how they do that. Okay. we're just about there. So, okay, let's cover the fake Miss Froy. Okay, let me lead into this because this is perfect structure. The way they do this, it just chef's kiss. Okay, so we saw we've talked about this a couple times so far, but when the judge tells him she's not there, he goes in, tells his wife, "Oh, she was there." Suspense. That sets up the suspense for this. But she gets mad at him, tells them, and it's like, "Oh, yes, we're going to get out of this." And then she goes back in the car and she's like, "Oh, I told them." And then this is how good the dialogue is, by the way. It was amazing. No. And he says to her, "Your husband will divorce you, but my wife will definitely never divorce me." And at that point, she gets this look on her face like, oh, like she's turned again.
And we don't quite appreciate, I think, today just how damning that was. I mean, divorce was much more difficult back then,
Right?
And it definitely would have meant that the woman posing as Mrs. Todhunter, the paramour, that she would have been socially ostracized.
Yeah.
Her life would have been ruined. And so she has that pressure. It's not simply a matter of, well, you have to go and get a job or find someone else. I mean, she would have lost her station permanently. And there's an element, perhaps, of social climbing in what she's intending to do by marrying him. He's, a rising legal figure, and who, frankly, would lose a lot of that if he were to divorce her. Which is interesting because the novel implies it's a little bit differently that Todhunter is more into her than she is into him, and they flip it around in a way
that is definitely flipped in the movie. Yeah. They give great motivations for these people to lie to her, and so that at this point she lies of when we see the fake Miss Froy, and they bring the fake Miss Froy to her cabin to say, "Oh, is this the one?" She's like, "Yeah, that's the one," and she's like, "She's lying." She's Yeah, it's great. That's suspense right there. It and that with suspense you've got to have teases like that of it getting out, and you're like, yes, it's going to happen, and then it doesn't, and it maintains the suspense, and you usually don't let it off until the very end of the movie.
Yeah, and it's right at that point that you begin to wonder if Iris is doubting herself. That's the point of like her maximum doubt, right before the window, the name.
Oh, right, the window.
Yeah, I apologize for jumping ahead.
Oh, no,
kind of
no problem.
The narrative that's established in the movie.
Yeah, so the midpoint of the movie, it's great. She goes back to the cabin. There's this amazing shot where it goes on each of the people in the cabin that we've seen before, and it double imposes Miss Froy's face on all of them, and it keeps moving. And then there's this creepy shot of the fake Miss Froy with what you see real Miss Froy's face, and it fades, and it's fake Miss Froy with this creepy look, and it's so good.
And that's something that actually is better set up in the novel, because in the novel, when she's first trying to describe Miss Froy, all she can remember is the clothes that she was wearing, and they do that in the movie. But I feel like that little line of dialogue gets lost in a way that the author emphasizes more in it, which is the fact that she's not exactly sure what Miss Froy looks like. She can't really describe her, and in the movie,
and this one she knows exactly what she looks like, and
and we know what she looks like because we've seen her as an audience.
And in a book you can get away with that, but in this one you see her, and you see her several times. Yeah. So you got to go that route, and she was wearing exactly the same clothes, even to the point where her companion character Gilbert starts to doubt her because look, she's wearing exactly the same stuff. Yeah. So then we go back to the dining car, and she's given up at this point. She thinks she is hallucinating her, and they're having this conversation. At the very beginning of it, this is where the suspense comes in on the scene level. They show the window, and as you see it, there's the Froy on the window. You're like, oh, and you remember it from before. Set up and payoff. It's a very simple, effective storytelling tool. And then you're like, the suspense part, you're like, look at the window. Yes. Look at the window. And they're literally, this is what Hitchcock calls talking baseball. It's just nonsense stuff. I mean, it's important for the characters themselves, but the audience doesn't care. He's talking about his dad who's not in the story.
Yeah.
And they kind of play with he's interested in her, but she's not interested in him. And that's what that conversation is. But we don't care about that. We're just like, look at the window.
Yes. But of course, by the time she can get him to look, it's gone.
Yeah.
So
the way they do that.
Another figment.
Yeah. So and I didn't quite understand the end of this, but the way that they play it is she looks at the window, she sees it, but right as she sees it, they go into a tunnel and it's dark. And then somehow they're out of the tunnel real quick and it's gone. And I'm like,
it evaporates or something.
I don't get
that.
it.
Yeah.
Like,
that was one of those ones that was a little too convenient.
yeah.
But at the same time, I kind of like it because it's still not entirely tangible. It confirms her in memory of being with Miss Froy.
Right.
But Gilbert needs something more tangible, and then he literally gets it with when Iris has her freak out, and this is when Dr. Hartz is like, okay, I think I need to take you to my clinic where you can relax and we can help you.
Right.
And then Gilbert's standing out, and you see, and then the guy chucks the garbage.
Yeah. This is perfect.
And you see the label, so he literally has that physical evidence, which flies away.
And it's Herman's herbal tea.
And he sees it, but he sees it for long enough to where it's finally that tangible evidence where there is something to Iris's story.
Right.
And so he becomes a lot more supportive. I mean, he's already been somewhat supportive, but there's still that sense.
Now he's definitely on board for the rest of the movie.
Team Iris.
And that's a perfect midpoint. Like it takes a turn, and then we're I'm making hand gestures. You can't see it, but the plot has been going one direction, and now it takes a turn for the rest of the movie, and it gives it a new energy.
And here's, I think, where you start to see the politics more, because up until this point, you don't know why they would have kidnapped or absconded with Miss Froy.
Right.
I mean, there's because it's not really established early on the whole thing about the troubadour. I mean, you see her listening, you see him playing, then something mysterious happens to the troubadour, and you don't know what is the big deal with Miss Froy, because she advertises herself. She's an English governess. She's been living in the country for 6 years. She is just, she seems so totally unassuming, unimportant, and yet you have so it's like, what's the big deal about this?
Right.
And so that's part of, I think, why that adds to the sense of skepticism a lot of people have, is like, why would somebody kidnap a middle-aged English governess? What's the big deal? And you still don't know exactly what's going on there, but that then you start to see that unpacked as you get it into the third act.
Right. And that's a good point to jump into the third act. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, the way they set up the third act is, there's a scene where they see the bandaged lady for the first time, and there's a nun there she's wearing high heels. It's weird. They're like, what's the deal with that? She's not actually a nun. And then he has the idea of, what if that's Miss Froy under the bandages? It's a funny joke right there where he's like, I have this really, really stupid idea, and she's like, I'm not surprised, or something like that.
Real quick,
yeah.
Before then, they're looking in the car. They reach the baggage car. They find Miss Froy's spectacles, these pince nez that she.
Oh, yeah.
And you have the fight with the Italian magician.
Oh yeah, I completely jumped over that.
But what you're seeing there, because I take the two in sequence, is that they are beginning to. They're not aware of what they're doing, but they are beginning to pick apart the conspiracy. They've identified that the Italian guy is involved, because they find the spectacles. Oh, look, we found the spectacles. And then the Italian guy says, oh, those are my spectacles. And Gilbert's like, hey, they wouldn't fit your nose.
And of course, they have the Vanishing Lady act.
Yes.
I thought that was really clever.
That was such a great shout out to the. I mean, the Wheel Spins is to me just such an incredibly generic title. The Lady Vanishes is so much of a better one.
Yeah, you can't even tell what that's about.
And you don't even need to have that shout out in the movie for it, and yet it's there, and it's so nice, so smoothly incorporated.
Right.
You have the reveal with with the patient, and they're asking Hartz, and that's when Hartz talks about how it looks, and it's at that point that you realize that Hartz is in on it. because he's so
that's
yeah. I wish I could, but it would actually undo the damage. But why don't we try this? Why don't we go have a drink? And then close the door, and he starts barking out orders.
yeah. And this is the third act level of suspense.
Yes.
They tell you he's the bad guy. Most importantly, they do not tell the main characters. And so you want to yell at them, he's the bad guy. So they go into the dining car once again. They get a lot of use out of this dining car set.
Oh, it's such an important component.
Yeah.
It's also you start to see another part of the plot unraveling when he's talking to the nun, the nursing sister.
Right.
And it turns out that one, as they've already figured out, she's not a nursing sister. But two,
she's not deaf. What was it?
She's not deaf. Yeah, she's not deaf and
dumb.
dumb.
Yeah.
But she's also English, and that instantly becomes like because she's obviously an accomplice. But she says it's like the first thing she says to Dr. Hartz is, "You didn't tell me this woman was English," as if somehow
as if it matters.
Yeah, exactly. It's like this, and it's an interesting scruple that you see also, I think, in a way in Flightplan near the end, although in a way that doesn't make quite as much sense. But it's this idea that all of a sudden that matters. That gets to the context. It's this idea that in times of trouble, the English they come together.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and so you start to see that she's willing to do this if the woman is French, if the woman is Russian, if the woman is Ruritanian, but oh my gosh, English. All of a sudden the scruples come in because and without that you wouldn't have had what happened or what doesn't happen in the dining car.
Yeah, in the dining car, I'm going to talk a little bit about the cinematography of this.
Oh, go ahead.
And it's may not be the best format for this because since it's a podcast, but I'll just describe the shots. They have every shot in that sequence. You see these wine glasses, and they're wide shots with them small in the shot, and then they keep getting more and more prominent in the shot, and it's telling you there's something up with these glasses.
Yeah.
And then he serves the glasses to them, and since he's the bad guy, you assume, oh yeah, these are poisoned.
Well, he actually tells the nursing sister.
Oh, does he?
He says,
I miss stuff in dialogue sometimes.
I want you to put something in these, and so he said, and he tells her because they also have accomplices in the crew, is that I'll give you something, you put it in there. I'm going to order the green chartreuse, and then you put it in the not green chartreuse.
Right.
So he has this. It's interesting because his glass is so distinctly different from theirs. So you could see his, and then they're actually brandy glasses, and yeah, there's looming there, and all of you lose focus on them at the end when Iris drinks hers, and she's kind of just out of focus because the focus is on Hartz on the right, going. Now they've taken it. So
yeah.
This is where I suppose if he had a mustache, he'd twirl it.
This increases the suspense of him telling specifically, like again with suspense. The more clarity, the better. Of we know for sure these are poisoned. I didn't because I didn't listen apparently, but yeah. And then when you see those glasses getting more and more prominent, you're like, oh look, they're. Oh yeah, it makes you feel it.
There's also this double entendre toast that unfortunately I didn't get the script for, but it's kind of like it's sort of like confusion to our enemies. It's such a thing that he's still trying to play up that he is their friend, but it turns out the enemies he might be referring to are them. He's kind of lording.
Yeah, I love that shot. That double. Yeah,
double.
Yeah, that's good.
So well written. He gets to the cabin, and and this is where you get a bit of the cartoonishness of Hartz because he reveals everything to them. This is what I that whole thing that they make fun of nowadays. Now the villain has to monologue.
I do it in my script.
So he has to. Well, we're going to do this. I'm going to do this. He doesn't just like wait for them to pass out, and where he could continue to keep them because why tell them unless it's clear at this point that and it's clear at this point apparently he's decided he's going to kill them. But then this is another plot hole. Well, if he's going to kill them, why not just poison them? It's just it's not exactly clear why he feels the need to monologue apart from making it clear that he what his plan is going to be so that they know how to disrupt it.
Right.
Which he doesn't think is going to be a big deal because they're supposed to be knocked out. But surprise and surprise, they're the English stick together. So when after they fake pass out, which the things I had to watch this a couple times to pick up on it is that my question was how would they know to fake passing out? And then I realized then again he told them it was meant
Yeah,
to be,
he
and
did
that's
told
when
them.
they start. Oh, we're going to pretend.
It's like, oh, okay.
And then as soon as Hearts leaves, they wake up Gilbert. They're locked in, but Gilbert jumps the window. He goes in, and this is when the nun outs herself as being English and says, I'm not going to support this anymore. They free Miss Froy, and the fake Miss Froy shows up, and they bandage her, and they stick her in there, and it looks like they've successfully disrupted it. This is the point at which Iris starts to attain a more conscious control over events. And I think this is something that you see also shouted out.
And that's a very third act thing. You need to the main character needs to know what they're doing, what their purpose is, like concrete, clear when they're going into the third act. So,
in the second act, she's constantly passing out and waking up and passing out and waking up. And this is the last time she fakes it, because now she's starting to assert control.
Oh, I didn't even pick that up.
Yeah. And so now she has that control. But they successfully disrupted the plot, and they get so close to succeeding because they reach the station. It's like the last stop before the border. It's like 5 minutes out of the station, they're going to be at the border. They're going to be over the border, and they're going to be out of the jurisdiction of this, fake Landia or wherever they are, and how Hearts. He's gloating over Miss Froy, and then he realizes, wait a minute, this isn't how it should be bandaged. He uncovers, and he sees the Frau Krummer or whatever her name was, and it's like, okay, and then you see him, just how connected he is. He can literally pull cars off the train, and there's no concern whatsoever about creating a fake pretense or anything to get passengers off or anything. They're just going to go ahead and take these cars, and whomever's on it, they're doomed.
Right.
And that's where you start to see, I think, that that's where the politics become overt, because you get to the sighting, and they realize they've been taken off the train, and they go to the dining car, and I just love this line, which is where it's like, well, they didn't just take our car. Well, there's the dining car. There's nobody going to be in the dining car. Oh, no, it's tea time, of course. And because who is going to be in a dining car?
British people, of course.
Just the British people.
Yeah.
So he goes there, and it's Charters and Caldecott, and it's the Todd Hunters, and he can sit there and say, this is what's happening, and they're just so believers in English order. They can't possibly accept it.
They can't imagine that. And this is suspense, by the way. This is amazing suspense.
Yes.
Because what's going on. If these guys are going to start shooting at them, or something's going down, and they just aren't having it. And it's at a certain point they're talking about going off the train and talking to them. It's like, no.
But it's that great line about how things like this just don't happen. And then Miss Froy says, "We're not in England now."
Yeah.
It's like that might be true in our safe, sceptered isle, but when you're in this nasty, dangerous place called, the continent, stuff like this just happens. And then you have Todd Hunter and that wonderfully statement, they can't possibly do anything to us. We're British subjects.
Yeah.
This idea that, and of course, this is something that they play into when they have the soldier come on, and he's like, well, there's been a problem, but we have cars waiting for you. We're going to take you to the British embassy. And they're kind of, it's a very clever way of leading into that. He even tries to win the moment by saying, you could trust me. I went to Oxford. And then I think it was Tyler. I went to Oxford too. And then Gilbert bashes him on the head, and he says, and then, why did you do that? Well, I went to Cambridge. The Englishness of it really starts to become very overt.
Yeah.
And then when you have the shootout, and it doesn't really. It's not until the moment when Charters steps off the train to apologize for the fact that Gilbert has hit the officer in there and he's shot at, that they finally realize, oh my gosh, this is actually happening. I mean, even when Gilbert tells them they've detached the train, and Caldecott goes, they can't do that. Our bags are in there.
Really?
Yeah. And Gilbert's like, well, I'll go show you. He says, we better not be having it. It's just the idea this is happening is so beyond the realm.
Yeah, they're just, it's, yeah.
And they
exactly.
literally have to have a bullet fly past him. Charles has to be Nick has to see his own blood.
Yeah.
This is actually happening.
And he seems really I don't know, kind of chill for just getting shot in the hand.
Well, that's that English sang-froid. So, but then it's such a wonderful moment where they all rally together. All of a sudden, they're banded together. You know, Todd Hunter's being a jerk.
Yeah.
He's still sputter. He even has a gun and he won't pull it out. His lover has to kind of yank it from him so they can actually have two guns against this squadron of soldiers shooting at them. And you have that wonderful English understatement where they're kind of like, where I think it was Caldecott. You know, he has gun and says, you know, I won a box of cigars once, and Charter says, oh, don't believe him. He actually he's a dead shot, and they're firing. You have the gunfire, and it's just, and that's of course, and it's only then that you find out what this is all about.
Yeah,
it's only then that Miss Froy.
Miss Froy. Yeah. So this is the point where she realizes stuff is getting heavy and she's got to take off, and she's like, I gotta give you guys the code before I go, and she whistles a tune to them.
If only there was an ethnomusicologist around, I can whistle this tune.
Yeah. It's very convenient, and he remembers it really well.
Yes, he did. Well,
until
it gets distracted by another song. We'll just leave it at that. But then you have that wonderful scene where that unfortunately gets overplayed, I think, which is where Todd Hunter, even in the middle of the shootout, he's like, I'm going to try to reason with him. I'm going to try to surrender. And so he comes out and he's waving the white handkerchief, and they shoot him. And he falls to the ground. He's like, you didn't understand it. Blah, he's dead.
Yeah.
People have cited this as a callback to Neville Chamberlain in 1938 at Munich. And it's a false callback because this was filmed before Chamberlain got off the plane and waved the piece of paper saying, I have a signature from Herr Hitler. We have peace in our time. But it is, but Todd Hunter is very much the appeasement figure.
Hitchcock is just that smart. He predicted it.
He's that prescient, exactly.
He's a prophet.
Yes, he is. It is the statement of, you know, you could sit here and claim all this thing, but one, you know, this stuff is happening. You have to be aware, and two, you know, when the shots are firing, you can't continue to commit to this silliness that you know, which he does. So. But then there's this question. Well, they're running out of bullets. The soldiers apparently aren't, because apparently they've got like a whole trunk full of bullets that they're firing. So how are they going to get out of this? And they get out of it through English teamwork. I love it.
Yeah,
it's like they're gonna sit there. I mean, granted, you have the locals in the engine, but they are conveniently shot. So it's the English that are doing it, and they get to the point where they have to do the switch and even the nun, and she gives her life. It's like she has to pay for her mistake.
Yeah,
but she does, and she comes through, and then you have the escape, and it's over. They're in England at last. So
yeah, and then we come to the ending, which they have. This is really clever. I'm just gonna say how it plays out in the movie. The fiance I don't know if we mentioned that the Iris is, she has a fiance and she's gonna get married as soon as she gets back to England.
Reluctantly.
Yeah. But she's not. She hasn't shown much interest in this other guy either, Gilbert. But at the end of it, the fiance is walking towards her and she jumps into the carriage with Gilbert, and he's like, "What?" And then do they kiss at that point? I don't know. Anyway, but they get together.
Yes. And they go, and of course you have the wonderful shot of Charles and Caldecott thinking that they can make the final day of these incredibly long cricket matches, and it turns out that it's rained out.
Yeah.
Which kind of I think does a nice kind of subtle dig at their at how trivial it all is. All these things they were willing to do, it turned out they wouldn't have gotten to see it anyway.
Right. This movie would have been much shorter had they figured that out earlier.
Exactly.
Or I don't know if it would be. I don't know if they'd probably just, I don't know, play with their sugar cubes on the table.
Well, and that actually gets to something that I'm looking forward to getting to when we talk about Flightplan, which is how, how so many of these, and this is something I frequently see talked about, is how technology changes how you can plot these things.
Right.
And whereas, I mean, and you see it early on with the phone call situation when they're trying to get information about how their inability to know things that we just now know instantly. You know, that ability to be ignorant is so central to driving the plot sometimes, and it is
Right.
here. So just like you were talking about.
Yeah, and then we get they're in the embassy they're waiting to go in and talk to the guy, and he's whistling the tune, and she's like, "No, that's the wedding march," and then they go in there and they're like, "Oh, dang it, we don't have the tune," and they go in there and miss. No. This is what happens. They hear the tune being played on piano from in the room, and then they go in there. It's Miss Froy playing it.
Yes.
It's like, oh, double happy ending, and it ends on that shot of Miss Froy.
Yeah. And it feels like it's an earned happy ending.
Yeah, it's a good ending.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you kind of it's like I watched War of the Worlds, which is another film I'm hoping to get to, the 2005 one, and I thought the ending where everyone survives in the family was just so fake.
Right.
There's a lot I like about that film. There's quite
Yeah,
a
they
few-
make it so brutal, and then it's like,
Yeah.
oh, these guys are the
yeah, but
plot armor.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we might get to that.
Yeah, I really hope we do because that's such a fun.
That's a good idea.
Those two films, but-
Okay, so that is our review of The Lady Vanishes. We'll get to our star ratings at the end of the episode, so wait up for that. Okay, now our review of Flightplan. A bereaved woman and her daughter are flying home from Berlin to America. At 30,000 feet, the child vanishes, and nobody will admit she was ever on the plane.
Both a very similar film and a somewhat different film.
Yeah.
So, I think I picked up at the beginning. I mean, the differences really stood out with you have that bucolic opening of Lady Vanishes, and then you had the opening of Flightplan. And it's whoosh whoosh whoosh.
Right. Yeah, that's okay. That's my one big negative note, the opening of that.
Yeah.
They use this really disorienting, nonlinear opening where they're cutting between
Yes.
several different scenes and you don't know when they're happening or it's very, not the way I'd start a movie.
I also wondered if that was and this gets to the comparison. I mean, there were two remakes of Lady Vanishes. There was one in '79.
Oh, right, I saw that.
With the obvious romantic coupling of Elliot Gould and Sybil Shepherd, which I just cannot really think of. That working well, and obviously the film was successful. And then they did the BBC did something more recently with it, and so when you first told me that this was maybe not an homage, but
It's a loose remake.
Yes.
It's not admitted by anyone, but it's clearly the same story.
oh, I think so too. I mean, and there are all sorts of callbacks, and I'm wondering if that, and so maybe I'm reading into it, but I think that use of the U-Bahn like that. Because it's like
Is that the train?
Yeah, it's the Berlin subway, and I'm thinking, I'm sometimes wondering if I'm reading the homages in there. Like, so it's like this is the only way in the 21st century where you can insert a train into a movie convincingly. We don't travel through Europe on trains as much anymore, but we do use the underground.
Yeah, underground. Yeah.
Between the U-Bahn and then you have Jodie Foster's face, and
Right.
then you have her
And
husband.
then it cuts to her looking at her husband in the casket. We don't see him, and that's for storytelling reasons. I just realized, but yeah. So then it's kind of disorientingly cut, but then it goes to her comforting her daughter in bed, and it's a much shorter Act One than much more easy to swallow than the Act One of Lady Vanishes.
And I have to say, by the way, I could sympathize with her. I mean, she's very much like Iris in that even though she's lived in Berlin, she lives in Berlin, I should say, that she's something of a fish out of water. You can kind of see it with some things. I could really feel for her when she is going to the airport and she has her bags and she has her daughter Julia, and she's navigating her bags downstairs because there's no elevator. And I've been to Europe a couple times, and that's always the challenge. Is you go there like a American with all.
Oh, do they not have elevators in Europe?
Well, all these old buildings from like the
Oh, that
17th,
makes
18th,
sense.
19th century. They don't really put elevators in them, so you have to basically everything you have to anticipate you're going to have to be carrying it up and down steps. Even a lot of the public transport that you have to navigate steps, and so it's like she's navigating the bags. I'm like, oh, I can so empathize,
Right.
especially since she's backing for two. So I agree it's jarring because and this is where it is shorter, but I feel like it does a disservice. They really seem to be leaning on Jodie Foster to sell who she is, her situation.
Right.
And they do it with the pills, I think, in a way they don't have anything necessarily falling on her head the way that they do in Lady Vanishes. But I mean, it's like I feel like that they're asking a bit too much of her. I mean, she's definitely, you could tell
Right.
she's so
And
sold.
it's kind of the circumstances of the situation more than it is that they show that she gets a knock on the head.
Yeah.
So.
But she, I mean, you could tell she's emotionally bereft. Again,
Right.
Jodie Foster, fantastic actress. She can sell that. But you don't get the sense of the confusion that they do they put so much time into in Lady Vanishes in terms of saying, that she's, discombobulated in a way that could cause her to question reality.
Right.
Jodie Foster is definitely depressed. Does that mean she's questioning her reality? That's where I have one of my notes. So,
Yeah, that's where we would part on that one because I was I mean, you haven't gone into this yet, but I very much bought into the she could be going crazy thing, and I've seen this before, even though I don't remember most of it, and I know how it has to end, but still, even it got me that way. But
I also and there's a lot of foreshadowing that first act.
right,
And I was thinking, and they do it with they do with the music, and they definitely make more use of music. And I think that's the difference between a film made in 1938 and a film made in 2005. I mean, I find you watch films from the 1930s, and it's like they're still figuring out how to use sound in film.
yeah,
And 2005, they have the soundtrack, but you also have the crows. I mean, there's just a sense.
yeah, they can
of,
dial it in.
Yeah.
Just
Was there even a daylight scene in Berlin?
there was not. I don't think.
Yeah,
It's
like,
I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, it's like perpetually dark.
Right.
There's like you know more about the filming, but this seems like there's like a blue filter everywhere in Berlin.
Yeah, there's definitely color correction in this
Yeah.
movie. So, or color grading. Yeah, which for non-film people, that's where they mess with the colors in post and give it a look. And like the Matrix is all green, that kind of thing. And it's not always that obvious, but yeah. Okay, so Act 1 is very streamlined. I thought it did a very good job of setting up a more emotional premise than the Lady Vanishes. That would probably be its strong suit. I think we'd both agree for Flightplan over Lady Vanishes. They make it a little girl, and it's her daughter. Yeah, the dad has just died. And so it's about as emotional as you can get. And then there's this interesting element when they were in the airport and they were looking at the plane, and it's this really big, tall plane, and there's people cleaning it on the side, and the little girl is like, those men could fall off. He's like, they won't fall off, honey. And she's like, but they could. And it's a really interesting foreshadowing to what happened with the dad. I'm not sure if they mentioned it before that. If not, I didn't catch it.
They don't.
Yeah.
I don't think he's dead, and there's implication that it was unexpected and sudden.
Right.
And they definitely talk about it more. I must confess, I didn't pick up on that connection between the allusion to.
And I didn't either. It was actually my mom when I was watching it with her.
and of course they also established early on that and I think this is helpful given what she does later, that Jodie Foster isn't just a passenger on the plane, she also helped to make it, that she's a propulsion engineer.
Yeah, she designed the engines.
Yeah, for fake airlines. The name is Alto, and I cannot figure out for the life of me Alto is that an acronym? Is that a foreign word? I should have run it through Google Translate maybe, but it's just like fake airline, and of course it's not so much a plane as it is like a cruise liner in the sky, given how large this thing is.
Yeah, this thing is ginormous. I watched behind the scenes documentary on the building of the set, and set is kind of selling it short. They built an entire inside of like this basically Airbus size, before they had Airbus, double decker plane that had all these different like a bar in the back and different cabins and like a cargo area, and there's like an area above the ceiling that comes into play later. They went all out with it.
It's kind of funny too, because I read somewhere, and I might have the statistic wrong, is that the Lady Vanishes was shot on a stage that was like 90 foot long.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, and I think that does a great job of conveying the cramped nature of the train.
Yeah. That's probably my biggest gripe with the movie is I feel like it would work better if it were a smaller plane.
Yeah.
Because there's less, I don't know if suspects is the right word, but people that could have seen her, and it's just, again, I'm torn about this because it would be just her running up and down one aisle the whole movie, but so I see why they did it, but
they
I don't know.
It does feel a bit like a failure of imagination.
Yeah.
So
they could have that limitations, especially in filmmaking, are helpful. Like they make you have better movies. Like Star Wars would not be Star Wars had they had the giant budgets that the new Star Wars movies do. That's not a dig on the new Star Wars movies. I'm not telling you my opinion on those. I don't want to start a Star Wars holy war here.
yeah, so we'll save that for
Right.
We're trying to burn bridges.
Yes. Okay. So then we get to she's on the plane.
And of course, it
Yeah.
is awfully convenient that I got to figure out how to get this special pass, where she and her daughter are able to get on the plane before anybody else. They're literally the only ones walking down the gangway, which is necessary for the plot. And the thing is that this goes back to what you were just saying. I didn't feel it was necessary for them to do that so as to create the uncertainty about Julie, because I mean, I get on planes every so often, and I'm usually not paying attention to the people around me. I'm usually focused on gotta get to my seat, gotta unpack, gotta grab my headphones, and most people are generally like that. But it was just like so artificial that
Yeah, it seemed weird.
Yeah, it's like the entire plane is empty. There's just one flight attendant who supposedly
And it seems like if she got that special treatment that they'd believe her more.
Exactly.
But
or that they'd have more records or something. But then again, that's another aspect of this.
Anyway, but they do have a very touching scene there where they, oh my goodness, just the image of it. Like they look out the window and the trolley car's coming in and you see the coffin on it. And it's like, oh my gosh. And they cut to this close up of the girl looking out the window, and Jodie Foster's right behind it. It's on our cover photo if you want to look at that.
And of course, you get the fogging in the heart.
Yeah, of course.
Which is a very clear Lady Vanishes callback, as we'll.
Yeah, that's the most direct Lady Vanishes reference. So they set up that heart, and she just looks at it. Jodie Foster stares at it, and I didn't recognize until second viewing that it was her putting the heart on the window for her dad. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like that's heartbreaking.
It is, and she's a good actress. And you think I looked her up on
the
IMDb.
little girl.
Yeah. She doesn't act anymore. She did
Oh,
some
that's
roles
too
around the
bad.
time, and she dropped out of acting. Maybe she found a purpose somewhere else or something.
Well,
but,
yeah, maybe it's a good thing. There's horror stories about child actors.
and Jodie Foster could tell a few of them that she was a child actress herself back in the day. So. I guess as you could run into that story about John Hinckley, and it's like, yeah, I don't want to have that hanging over my head, so I think I'll go find an easier profession, like I don't know, becoming a doctor.
So then we get to the little girl vanishes. Jodie Foster goes to sleep, wakes up, she's not there.
And I have to say, as a person who flies and who has flown with a child her age, how Julia got away from her, I will never understand, because and maybe it's just she's just supposed to be exhausted from the pills or something, which actually they do mention she was on sleeping pills, but it's just like, I mean, okay, there's no room to get out in a modern seat.
What they do have her sleeping across. This is kind of not completely clear, but
Yeah.
I didn't notice it till the second watching that they go back to the seats in the back where there's a bunch of space to lay down, and they lay down on aisles across from each other.
Okay, because I missed that. I thought she was still in that window seat. I'm thinking, okay, anybody climbs over me, it wakes me up. Anybody tries to reach over and snag someone, I'll definitely know that. Yeah, maybe if I was, on sleeping pills might be a little different, but that was where I was kind of like, okay, yeah, I don't see how Julia vanishes on a plane where a person can't really twitch their hand without the people to their left and right knowing about it.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, then we get to so she slowly just searches the plane, not freaking out yet, just like, oh, she's probably around here somewhere.
Well, this is where we get to know, we get to learn that she's on a plane with, it's apparently this is like some sort of flight of jerks. And for me, the ones I had to focus on were the parents who were ahead of her.
You're talking about, the passengers? Yeah.
The passengers. Yeah, the parents ahead of her with their kids, and they're doing, apparently they're like the only obnoxious kids on a plane, which is in itself a minor miracle. But it's like, so
that's filmmaking. You got to have one family representing the thing. They can't have it all over the place.
Yeah.
Storytelling wise, you couldn't track it all. But yeah.
But you have, I'm thinking as a parent, if I have a parent on the plane who is freaking out because they can't find their kid, I'm, totally. I mean, priority one for me is my children. Priority two is the other children, because I can really feel what that must be like, and they're kind of like, oh well, forget her.
And there's a guy in first class that's like, it's not like she lost her. It's a very 2000s reference. He's like, it's not like she lost her Palm Pilot.
Yeah, exactly. So, there is such a 2000s-ness about this that
there is
that to me actually kind of
I think I know what you're talking about. We'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. but it is interesting how, I mean, it's like the staff, and I have to say this, they do a really good job, I think, of selling the staff. How they're big professional, with of course the major exception later on, which was an issue. But they about how they're patient with her, they're talking to her in a reasonable tone. They appreciate that she has a concern. They're trying to address it, but at the same time, you could also tell that they're human beings. Get that scene with Matt Bomer and the flight attendant and the girl. And they're having fun, and unfortunately, they come out and Jodie Foster sees this, and Kyle sees this, and she.
Oh yeah.
Out. Mm-hmm. But it's like you could tell. I mean, I found them to be like the most believable aspect of the movie. They're trying to do their jobs.
That's kind of the thing that makes these characters work. Is like they're helpful, but to a certain point, they're just like, I'm just doing my job here. Yeah. Like,
well, if anything, I thought they were a little too accommodating. We'll get to that in a little bit.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is. But anyhow, go ahead.
At this point, she's starting to worry that. Mm-hmm. She's not around, and she goes back to the back, and the stewardess is like, oh, there's a girl in the bar, and she walks by, and the girl's walking out. It's not her. And then she starts to freak out.
And that's when you get introduced to the flight marshal. It's another example of, here's another callback, I think, to Lady Vanishes. Here's another person. He is another symbol of authority.
Right.
He literally has a badge, and of course, gun. But it's like, so we instantly are like, okay, we can trust him.
Yeah, definitely.
He's trustworthy. He's there literally to protect everyone on the plane.
And they do a good job of setting up his character before you even know that he's the flight marshal. Mm-hmm. He's just like a passenger sitting in the seat, which this is what flight marshals do. Mm-hmm. They just sit there as a normal passenger, no uniform, and he makes some witty comments across the aisle at her, and you kind of like this guy, and it gets you on his side, and that will be changed at a certain point.
Yeah, although I think they don't do the transitions effectively. I don't know if this was because of Alexander Skarsgård, who plays the flight marshal, or because of the direction he received, but they kind of foreshadow the heel turn in a way that They
Right.
don't in The Lady Vanishes. And for me, it was kind of that was where I was rolling my eyes and said, "Oh, Hollywood, can't
Yeah.
trust us to you gotta hold our hand and shepherd us through."
Yeah.
But and then of course, but let's not forget, he's not the only authority figure on the scene. You got Sean Bean.
Yeah. The captain. Yeah. Let's get to that scene where
Yeah.
the captain comes out. Well, yeah, right after she meets the flight marshal because she's banging on the captain's door.
Yes.
The flight marshal
He mobilizes
grabs her,
her,
yeah,
right?
mobilizes her hand behind her back, and then you turn around and you see it's him, and then she's like, it's up to the captain if he wants to come out. The captain comes out, and they have this white galley area which they keep using. It's a great set. They have the captain come in there and they have a conversation, and I don't remember all the dialogue in there, but
I don't either, but I mean, and this gets to, I mean, where I can really appreciate having someone like Sean Bean playing that role. He does such a great job of conveying professionalism.
right.
Even there's this one point later on where he's like he's about to lose it with
Oh
Kyle.
yeah, later on in the second act
Yeah.
or third act turn.
And the thing is, by that point, it's like, I can appreciate why, even as a professional, by that point, he's lost it because he's gone above and beyond. He's been so professional. He's tried to be understanding. And
Yeah.
he just sells that
Just
character.
had enough.
Yeah, and he sells that character so well, and he does it in such a unshowy way. It's like he knows how to do it, and he knows how to do it that works. Because, I mean, it's very difficult to top Jodie Foster in this role as in
Right.
terms of shows, because she has to convey anxiety, panic, frustration.
And I think this is a much nicer character than Sean Bean usually plays.
Yes.
But it's
It shows that he can play. He just have
Yeah.
great actors.
personally, I think he's, as a person, he's probably like that in real life.
The other thing, of course, is that in spoiler alert, he doesn't die. Which, of course, is this whole trope that like this is around the time that he was appearing in all these things. He seemed to die. He
Yeah,
died
yeah,
in
yeah.
GoldenEye. He died in
Spoiler alert for a bunch of random non-disclosed movies.
but this might
Everything.
I've read somewhere that he apparently won't even do roles where he dies anymore because he's just
Yeah,
so tired of
it's
it.
just a thing.
So maybe this is like his favorite film because he lives to the end.
Yeah, he's a great character in this.
Oh, he is so good, and he if anything, he's a little too understanding, but oh,
He
man.
might be like the foil for her. Like she's getting more and more frantic, and he's just staying level the whole movie.
But I found I was empathizing with him a lot more than I was empathizing with her.
Oh, okay.
Because when she is losing it, and she's and again, I think Jodie Foster does a great job with the role, but I'm just like I could see his calculus. He's got this one passenger, and she is freaking out, and but she's also making these increasingly escalating demands.
Yeah.
I mean, at one point, you get the impression she's going to start demanding that they start removing the seats from the floor so they can check under them more effectively. And he's like trying to humor, but he's also thinking, this is not a flight of one passenger. I have
Yeah.
to think about the entire. And you could see that calculus in his head. And he makes it a bit overt when he's like, Miss, this is
Well, there's that one shot where it's on him where he's deciding whether or not they should search the plane,
Mm-hmm.
and you just see that in his eyes, and then you see that moment of decision, and it's like, okay, yeah, let her do it.
And it's where I have to respect the filmmaker because I think it would have been easy for a filmmaker to have him talking it out, like pulling one of the
Yeah.
one of the flight tests. Should we search the plane? That's not who he is. He is again, mid-2000s reference. He's the decider. He's going to make that decision, and he would not be the captain if he had to make decisions by consensus.
Yeah, it's true.
But he has to. Of course, there's always that he has to incorporate that sky marshal being there, which was a bit of which might have been unexpected. But he's very calm. He's always trying to be in command, and Sean B just sells it so well.
Yeah, I really love how they, and I guess we'll have to see what your opinion on this was, but I think they did a great job of making you think she's going crazy.
Yes.
Like at first, you believe her completely that she's on this plane, and they slowly ramp it up by they say she was never on the plane, and then the midpoint of the movie, the Am I jumping too far
Well,
ahead?
you're not jumping too far ahead, but this is where I actually have one of my annoyances, which is that okay, it's 2005, and yet somehow Kyle does not have a single photo of her daughter. Not
Right.
one. They camera phones were
Yeah, that is weird.
yeah, it came out 5 years previously. I mean, nowadays, you just whip out and zip, here you go. And you could argue maybe she doesn't have a device that does that, but then back then you carry around photos of your daughter. Never once do people ask to see images. Never once do
Yeah.
people ask, okay, what does she look like? It's just it's just a girl, and as we've already established,
Well, they do ask to see your ticket, and then
Yes.
oh, it's not in her pockets. They
Yes.
must have taken it out.
but I mean, sometimes I get on a plane with my son, and I'm like taking a snap, and it's like, oh, here we are on the plane type of thing. I send it to
Oh, yeah.
people. Here we're on the plane, and I can understand how you may not have that in this, but still, it's like there's not even a really they assume that she has a daughter, and then they instantly assume she doesn't, and never once is there, with the exception of the ticket, which in itself could mean nothing.
Right.
Okay, there's a Julia, whatever her last name was. Well, how do we know she's a 5-year-old and not a 55-year-old or something like that?
Yeah.
So
So this movie is a psychological thriller as opposed to a suspense thriller like Lady Vanishes. So the difference is they don't tell you that they don't give you the inside information of the people that know what's actually going on. They just have you in Jodie Foster's POV the whole time. And I think that's really effective of like doing the emotional thing. It's got this straight through line that you're
well, there's not a straight thread. There's this fascinating digression. I don't know if you're going to get to it. And if you are, then I'll stop. But there's the scene with the Arab passengers, and I absolutely love it because of how this is the most 2005 thing about this 2005 movie,
right,
where she's doing the, and it's at that point where the search is on. Basically, Sean Bean is invoking Sky Law, and we're going to look for this person. You could tell you're starting to see the air marshals. He's kind of getting a little snarky about things, so you could tell that he
doesn't believe her.
Yeah, so it's like in a sense they've taken the Hart's character and they split it in two. They're going to put the professionalism in Sean Bean. They're going to put the kind of the power in the air marshal. But then it's like she starts singling out the Arabs, which is to me is just such a white privilege flex. And
Yeah, that was weird. Like from I don't know, as a 2000s audience, how I would have seen it back then, but at this point, I was like, it's not going to be them. There's no way that they do that.
But what fascinated me was you get to that scene, and all of a sudden, it's like instantly all doubt is gone. And they're like, okay, it's got to be these people. And so instantly, it's like they instantly become the suspects. And the air marshal's like, we need to see evidence. I mean, he has no investigating authority, but he's like, I want to see receipts to prove your story.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
It's like
the thing that he says when she requests the hotel receipt.
Yeah.
He's like, you want me to get the receipt? And the air marshal's like, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, but it's like the moment that she singles them out, it's like her story instantly jumps in plausibility, and the moment they're exonerated, we're back to crazy Kyle.
Yeah, yeah.
Who can't even apparently out,
I think the movie would have been better without that whole thing.
Again, it's the most 2005 thing about
Yeah.
it. It's just like they got to throw that, and the idea that somehow they were smart.
And then they had the big mustachioed American man that gets angry at any implication that he's racist.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, again, it's very just in the same way that Lady Vanishes is of its time, so too this film is of its time. So, but that was really. But this is where you start to see that unraveling of Jodie Foster, and this is another point of plausibility is that the air marshal does have handcuffs and he does use them, but for someone who it is clear they're starting to think is unhinged, she's remarkably unrestrained.
Right.
It's like, well, you can't pin her to a chair. It's just like you can't just can find her, because especially, I mean, at one point she knocks her head. She's or no, excuse me, that was the Fiona, the flight attendant, who she gets hurt during the scuffle with the
Right.
yeah. And it's like at that point it's like, okay, clearly this is a passenger just out of control. She's literally injuring staff. But we're going to get you out of the plane. We're not going to bother to restrain her in any sort of way.
Yeah.
I guess for me, the association I had in my mind was with a Wolf of Wall Street, where Leonardo DiCaprio's character just gets so out of bounds on the plane they have to literally duct tape him to the seat. But apparently, if you party too much, they'll duct tape you. But if you start injuring staff, they'll just put handcuffs on you that. And just have you sit down.
Yeah, the handcuffs thing, I was like, she's still gonna run around.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get to the midpoint.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was amazing. The way they set it up is you think she's been going more and more crazy this whole time,
Mm-hmm.
and then they sell you on it. The captain tells you, or he's talking to her in the aisle, and it's like, "Can I talk to you in private?" And she's being belligerent, and finally just frustrated. He's like, "She's dead," and it equals she's crazy.
Yes, and that's where I have the question that Kyle ends up asking later on, which is, although she doesn't think to ask at the time, is, okay, well, if my daughter's dead, then where's the coffin?
Well, I think they try to make you think that the husband's coffin is actually her coffin.
Oh,
Because when she goes through the baggage later, she gets to there and she opens the coffin when she's looking for her. So, yeah, they don't do a great job of setting that up. But
that's really, I think, something that she does to. I like that scene because it's where she convinces herself that she's not crazy.
Right.
Because you could tell she's under stress. They mentioned that she's on anti-anxiety medication, and she's definitely having a rough time of it. And I think maybe they do a better job of selling her beginning to think she might be crazy than she does than you see in Lady Vanishes.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so then this is my favorite scene in the movie right here. They take her back to her seat, and she goes to sleep for a little bit. And when she wakes up, there's some random lady there, and as she talks to her, it becomes apparent she's a therapist, and she's trying to uncrazy her. And Jodie Foster just keeps saying, "I don't know you, I don't know," and you feel that a lot. It's like, yeah, just random stranger trying to psychoanalyze you. I don't think I'd be okay with that.
And it's interesting how, that's another, I guess bifurcation might be the word, of the Dr. Hart's role, which is Dr. Hart's also had the therapist hat, so to speak, and was. And
we'll get to something very similar to that in the Crisscross.
Yeah, but she and I like the way that I didn't like the way she was inserted in the movie when I saw it, but now I can appreciate what you're talking about, which is that just in the same way that she pops out of nowhere for Kyle, she pops out of nowhere for us, she pops out of nowhere for Kyle.
Yeah.
So just the same way that we kind of, because we
it makes you not trust her just that much more.
Or
makes you think she could be in on it and she could be a bad guy.
Or at the very least that we shouldn't trust her explanation because she doesn't know the full extent of what's going on that we do. And so we're kind of skeptical. We can appreciate Jodie Foster's skepticism towards the counseling.
Yeah.
So,
and at a certain point, this is where the confusing beginning kind of gets a little bit redeemed in my eyes. Of Jodie Foster finally starts talking to her, and she's like, "That night after he died, I was walking around and he was there." And so she hallucinated her husband having this conversation and walking around the town, going back to their apartment. And, that kind of sold me. And I understand why they made it so confusing at the beginning. And I actually listened to the making of this, and they were saying that was supposed to make you feel like you're going crazy at the beginning. To me, it was just disorienting. But when it gets to this point, it's like, oh, okay, I see what that was about. And then, then she takes it one step further. I must have imagined the daughter coming on the plane with me too. And so she's completely sold on this fact that she's crazy.
But
Did this work for you?
I couldn't tell. It didn't work for me as much because I thought she might have been saying that just to.
Oh yeah, just to mislead.
Yeah, but then
Which she does in a second. But,
Yes.
yeah. So then she's like completely. The thing that sold it for me was her eyes. Like they just got all watery and like distant when she was saying that. And so she leans over and she's like out of it type thing and looks out the window, breathes on it. There's the heart. And it's like, oh my goodness, she's real.
yes,
And then right from that moment, Jodie Foster changes and she's like, I think I need some time alone. Can I go to the bathroom? And they're like, yes, I think that would be a good idea.
and then she becomes a gremlin. And then
What?
she not in the Joe
Oh, I
Dante
see what you're
sense,
saying.
but
I've
she,
only seen that movie once, so yeah.
yeah, she becomes gremlin in the classic
Oh,
World War II
yeah,
sense of
that mess
she,
with
she climbs in the
airplanes.
plane
Yeah.
and starts sabotaging
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
And at this point, again, because I'm kind of I'm viewing this from in part from the perspective of the professionals. It's like this is when you tase her,
Yeah.
you strap her to a
Well,
seat.
I mean, she did sneak into the bathroom and then go up through the ceiling, and they didn't know she was doing it. And that when they do catch her again, she is handcuffed, and they take her back to the seat. And now the audience claps. They're applauding.
Yes, exactly.
So this,
it's
yeah.
like the walk of air shame.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a perfect second act down point at the end of the second act.
You know what I was missing in that scene?
Yeah.
I really would have absolutely loved it. And I get why they didn't do it because it would have been a jarring note of comedy. But if the passengers had taken some of their airplane fluid and thrown it at her as she was walking,
That changed
back.
the tone a lot.
but it kind of felt like that whole finally these people are doing their job because and this is where I feel they could have done a bit more of the perspective of the passengers as to what it was supposed to have been like to have to just especially to have this crazy lady who it's clear.
Well, I think if they would have done that, it would have broken the movie.
It would have, but I'd say they could have had a bit more about how they feel. I mean, it's clear from their perspective, the staff has indulged her. They've gone above and beyond, and they've done it in a way that's messed with the entire passengers,
Right.
and they're doing it again because now they're having to land can we call it sunny Newfoundland if you never actually see the sun there? But you're landing in Newfoundland, which is not exactly a destination that the people have booked to travel to, and it's kind of like it's become so about this person. She is it might have been a bit too on the nose and a bit too prescient to have called her Karen rather than Kyle.
All right.
But it's like for them to applaud. It was such a mild way of expressing the frustration they probably felt at that point.
Yeah, I love the shot of her point of view walking down the aisle and seeing all
Yes.
these faces just staring at her like indignant. I don't know if that's the right word, but
Annoyed, frustrated, angry.
Yeah,
they're just glaring at her.
Yeah, just glaring.
And of course, that's something that the movie then calls back to at the end, but we'll get to that.
Yeah. Okay, so then this is where we get into our Act 3.
Dun, dun,
Dun, dun, dun.
the Sky Marshal heel turn.
Yeah. So basically the big down point that we have here is we skipped right over her looking through the cargo bay and opening the casket and seeing her.
No, I don't think we got to that. Have we got to that part just yet?
No, we skipped over it.
Well, I thought it was a little bit later in the movie.
No, it's right before she's captured.
Oh, right. Okay.
Because he comes. Yeah. Anyway, she goes into the cargo bay looking for Julia to the point where she's like breaking windshields and pulling them out to look in cars, and that lost me a little bit.
Imagine explaining that to insurance.
Yeah.
Yes, I need to pay to
Crazy
replace
lady.
the glass of my car. No, it wasn't in motion. No, I wasn't in it. It wasn't even on the ground.
Yeah.
I had these windows smashed, and I need you to pay for it.
Yeah. You gotta have crazy lady
Yeah.
coverage.
Exactly. I mean, the trunk made sense, but smashing the windows, it was more like, underscoring just how determined she
Yeah,
was.
how far she'd go.
It was good in one sense though, because it kind of conveyed how it was a very masculine way of responding in the sense that she's trying to assert control.
Well, her name is Kyle.
Yeah, it's true, and how she does it in a very masculine way of I'm going to use violence to assert control, and it doesn't work for her,
Yeah.
and it ends up adding to this image of her as being unhinged.
Right. And then she gets to the coffin, and I'm not sure exactly what the movie's intent here is. Like, I think they want you to think that the daughter's in there. Oh, no, because she doesn't think she's crazy anymore. But she opens it, and it's kind of bizarre, though, because she is looking in there. Why would she open it?
Well, maybe she had to convince herself that she's right, that it's her husband in there.
Yeah, which does vindicate her, but it's also a very down moment of there's your dead husband, and she says to him, there's nowhere left to look. I don't know where she is.
I just have to say that it's for me it was a minor noise that this film so underutilizes John Benjamin Hickey, who is an actor.
Who's that?
He's the actor that plays the husband, and
Right.
if you ever want to see him, what he can do, he did a 2-season TV series called Manhattan, which
Okay.
he plays a scientist in the Manhattan Project.
This is
Before Oppenheimer, but and he does such a great job of playing that role, and he's such a good actor, and it kind of felt like, I hope he got a nice paycheck out of this, but I kind of felt they could have done so much more with him. He might I think made it better for Sky Marshall. I mean, Alexander Skarsgård is fine. Maybe he kind of foreshadows the heel turn a bit too early.
Yeah.
But I mean, it just shows you that there's such a wealth of acting talent.
He makes a good bad guy.
Yeah, I mean, there's not really a bad performance in it.
Yeah. So then she there's nowhere else to go, there's nowhere else to look.
Yeah.
She gets captured by the air marshal, who cuffs her and takes her back to her seat, and now the whole plane is not on her side. And the last button, the captain is landing because of all the stuff she was doing to the plane, and so you can feel it just going down, and she's she's desperate at this point. When they land, that's it.
Yeah.
She can't search the plane anymore. Great second act down. And then we get to the big turn, which you've been referencing, is the Sky Marshal ends up being the bad guy.
He's working with the flight attendant, with one of the flight attendants. And if you go back and see, it's like whenever they are seeking information, a key point of information, she always seems to be the flight attendant. So it's when the flight attendant calls like when Kyle was asking for, I was on the manifest, and it's that flight attendant who calls, and that kind of, I mean, she plays a vital role. I see why she's there, but they allude to something later on, but it seems totally unnecessary because that flight attendant always seems to be the one to provide the information that underscores or conveys the sense of, that she's crazy.
Yeah.
But she is so essential, and we find out that she's in on it, and she's got these issues. But it's like, okay, what has the flight attendant done to this point where she doesn't have an issue with it? I mean, you consider what's going on here. And there's because this is where you also see you discover the plot, because the air marshal then goes to the captain and says to Sean Bean, well, okay, turns out that this is a hijacking, and she wants $50 million and an airplane, and and also for all we know, like a Papa John's pizza when she lands. it's like this list of demands,
and of course this is the suspense setup.
Yeah.
Up to this point in the movie, it's been all psychological thriller, where you're just thinking in your head, is she crazy, is she not? But this one gets emotional into the suspense, where he's the bad guy, Kyle doesn't.
And nobody else does, really.
Yeah, nobody else.
So,
not the captain. Yeah.
And this is where I could really see why this is where you could start to see, if you think back, the things the air marshal does that make sense, which is that he has given her so much latitude to alienate herself, to make herself the bad guy,
Right.
that he doesn't even have to sell. He just says, I mean, he could go to her and say, yeah, you know, she's got a nuke, and you could say, oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Or she's got riot, you know, some poison. It's just that point where you can kind of say, oh yeah, you're predisposed to think negatively for you think the worst, and so you come up with the story. Oh yeah, she wants $50 million. Oh yeah, figures. If anything, it makes her seem more sane because it all has a purpose.
This third act, that's probably the weakest part for me. There is a sequence up until he goes down those
Yes.
steps that is amazing. But after that, the whole
Well, I love how the plane lands in Newfoundland, and apparently at some point in the movie, or maybe this is an alternate universe where Newfoundland is an American state because the FBI is there. You know, Canada, you know, the Mounties are.
Oh yeah, that's weird.
Totally
I never
present.
thought of that.
So, and then you had the fastest deplaning in history. I mean, if you've ever been on a plane, especially the larger it is, it doesn't exactly happen more quickly. It happens less. But she's there, and I have to say, I do love how this is set up, which is that she thinks it's still just about her and her daughter. She has no
Right.
idea about what the air marshal's planned. But I cannot figure out why the marshal takes off her cuffs.
Oh, okay. So what? I thought this part was really clever. That kind of assuage her, he convinced her that okay, we're not going to arrest you. We're just gonna make the passengers think we are, just so there's no comeuppance. That's the wrong word. Just so there's no. Yeah, we're going to make them think we're going to arrest you until we get down, and then we'll take you off and we'll just let you go.
Okay, so that makes more sense. I mean, I figured it helped to sell the Kyle as hijacker, but then it's kind of like they didn't. How they sell her that. I figured that maybe that was why they did, but that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, I love the part where so the plane is deboarding, the whole crew is about to go off, the captain is going off, and she's just badgering him. And I think you referenced this earlier. And he finally just snaps and is like, it's like tells the whole plan that she's doing, and she's like, "What?" Has confused look, and
then she instantly figures it all out.
Well, not instantly. Okay, so
figures out enough of it.
Yeah, the way it plays out is, I was gonna say douche face covers his tracks. The air marshal, he goes down the stairs and he's like, "I'm gonna go get the agents."
Yeah,
like he's trying to cover his butt right here, not doing a very good job of it. And she's like watching him go out, and he starts to go down the stairs very slowly. This is suspense. It's like by the time he gets to the bottom of those steps, she's lost. So she has to
see her up there, and you could see the little gray cells.
Yeah.
She's figuring out
And
exactly what's going on, trying to figure out what's going on here.
And she gets outside, looks at the tarmac, and there's FBI and like emergency vehicles. Yeah. And it's like, what? And then the shot where she realizes, and he's right at the bottom step, and she's like, "You get off the plane when I tell you to." And she it's clever because she uses that he has to do it because he set up that thing.
And this is the point where she takes charge.
Yeah.
And what happens next, I have a bit of skepticism about, because it's like, why didn't he see that fire extinguisher coming? I mean, how did he think this was going to play out? He gets back on the plane, and he's just like casual, like, we're going to have a conversation about this. Nope.
Smack. Yeah.
Right in the face. Yeah.
Yeah, that whole end fight, that's where I have the biggest issue with.
Oh yeah.
Because I'm like, that's kind of
that's where it just bleeds Hollywood. It's just like we're gonna.
Yeah.
She becomes the superhero.
You need the big and bad guy fight, and I have trouble. I can't recall it to you what happens except for the end. because I don't remember.
Well, it's like she locks herself in the cabin, the
Right.
where the cockpit. She locks herself in the cockpit, and
Oh, that part was great. On second
Yeah.
rewatching, I love that part.
and she does a misdirect, and that's pretty cool. And she uses it so she can get down, because it's clear that because we left at the part where she figures out there's a bomb aboard, and this gets to something that he again, monologuing, explains that the whole reason why he was killed, they're going to pin it on her. They and of course they point to her knowledge of the plane, and that somehow they had to use the coffin to smuggle the explosives on board, because apparently an air marshal can't do it, but they don't X-ray coffins. I just it's kind of like a hand wave away. But the point is that so the explosives are in the coffin, and she's been set up to take the fall for it because they're going to blow up the plane anyway. And she apparently knows that there's a part of the plane that will survive the explosion. And she, of course, finds her daughter, who apparently has been sleeping through all this. Isn't that convenient?
I think they drugged her. That's not outright said, but I think it's implied.
Yeah, because when he's explaining how I stuffed her in the food bin and everything, and this is where I'm like, and Kyle freaks out the stewardess accomplice, the flight attendant accomplice, and that's where I'm like, okay, so how did you think this was going to end? Is it like, okay, kidnapping the kid, she's on board, pinning it on Kyle, she's on board, maybe she's thinking $20 million, but at the point at which she could have stopped Kyle, Kyle's like, do you really want to be part of this? And it's like, oh, well, there's my conscience. And now I'm thinking it's a bad idea. I'm going to roll off the plane. And so there she goes.
Yeah, she leaves off the plane. And this is a parallel to Lady Vanishes that we'll cover in a bit.
So, and then, of course, you get, she retrieves her daughter, gets into the bomb-proof part of the plane, and blows it up. And
yeah, that explosion was like, I did not understand that. It was very well, first, just on a visual level, it was really slow, and I think it was so that you could see the guy getting blown up.
He was killed by bad CGI.
Yeah. And the thing I didn't understand is, why didn't the nose cone get blown off?
I know.
It's like, okay, it blew up, but what did it blow up?
The explosion was just as large as it had to be, and not a bit larger.
Not enough to affect any of the walls of the plane. Because the other thing is that the front of the avionics, it's right in the nose cone, and the inside of the nose cone had like this fabric that it looked like almost space fabric that you could put your hand through it. And I'm like, how did that not blow up?
Yeah. It's just like, you just kind of like go with it at that point.
Yeah.
But then you have that final scene where we get to validate Kyle.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, let me cover that.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so this explosion happens, and of course the whole crew turns and looks. They're still on the tarmac, and the captain's looking at the fog, and he sees the lady. See how I am with characters' names. He sees Jodie Foster's Kyle coming through the fog, and they're like, "What does she have on her shoulder?" And then, it's making me emotional. It's so great. Anyway, he stares at her, the captain stares at her, and they probably did the captain specifically because he's like the voice of reason of the whole thing, most authority of it, and he's looking for a while, and he's like, "It's her daughter," and then she comes out of the fog, and we see her, and it's like, oh my goodness, just the feels of vindication. And then later on, should I cover that?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Let's.
This is jumping to the end.
Yeah, I've got one note left.
Okay. So she goes to where the passengers are in this hangar, like I don't want to say a refugee type thing.
Like receiving, they're screening them and everything, and doing interviews, whatnot.
Yeah, so they're all just sitting in this hangar, in this massive group, and she walks down this aisle with all these people, and it's this wide shot where you are behind the crowd, and she's in the middle of the aisle with the other half of the crowd on the other side, and it's tracking with her, so you see all these people going past as they see her daughter, and it hits you in the feels of just the vindication with all these
Yeah.
people.
It's like you could have had her scream at them, "I was right all along, you jerkwads!"
Yeah,
and
it would not have landed.
Yeah, I think it would work. It would work. Unlike the throwing the food, which would have been discordant, for her to scream at them, "See." Holding her daughter, holding Juliet like Simba. See, this is the daughter you didn't think.
Right.
It would have worked because because you could tell she was just so righteous in that
I
moment.
think it would change the tone again.
I would prefer seeing a few more passengers kind of looking away in shame, especially those parents earlier.
Yeah,
on.
they do lead into that shot with her point of view of. First, it starts with the therapist, and the therapist looks away, and the family and one of the little girls like, "See, I knew she was real."
Yeah, the kids are the only ones who are willing to vocalize it. Yeah, so.
Anyway, so then it ends on a shot of them driving away into the white of the day, and I don't know, that it's a very much more emotional film than Lady Vanishes. That really hits just the daughter and the dad and the mom freaking out, and just that, making it a little girl that's your daughter rather than some random old lady, I think makes it much more emotionally poignant.
And I think it's the kind of thing they really couldn't have done in the 1930s with the code and all that stuff.
Oh, probably.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to push those buttons like that. So.
Okay. So, did you have one more note on it?
No, that was my note. Was the final walk right after, of course, Sean Bean as the captain officially gives officialdom before you get the walkthrough. You get Sean Bean saying I'm sorry. We should have believed you.
Yeah, right before they walk through.
You get the official validation, and that justifies her stride of triumph.
Right.
So,
I love that shot. It's a movie of setup for one. It's not the shot itself. It's all that setup before that just makes that shot hit.
And all it cost was blowing up a plane.
Right. Okay, so that is our review of Flightplan. So now we're going to get to the special part of our show, the thing that defines our show. This is a section where we're going to discuss the similarities and differences between the two movies. Here we go, Crisscross.
Crisscross.
So, I think it should have been a smaller plane. I think it would have made it similar to Lady Vanishes in the way that there's only one aisle back and forth, although a train is longer. But just that more confined space and limiting it to less people, less places where she could be, would make it more suspenseful and more like, might make her feel more crazy because it's like there's nowhere for her to be in here. It would be very difficult for the filmmakers, but I think it would make a better thing if they could crack it.
Oh, I agree. I mean, there's something to be said about creating a sense of claustrophobia. You never really get that in Flightplan because the plane just, like I said, it seems
it's so huge.
Exactly, and that especially since it would have helped, I think, to underscore the sense of craziness.
Yeah,
because the plane is so big, you can always plausibly see that there must be some place where they might not have looked. Whereas if it is claustrophobic, it's like it's kind of like when you're looking for your glasses or something, and you've seemingly checked everywhere and you can't find them. So I'm losing my mind.
Yeah. Okay, the next biggest similarity that I saw was both of them had a companion character. And for the Lady Vanishes, it was Gilbert. They had a casual dislike for each other, but we trust him because we know him for the first act. And he's very charming. He's very funny, too. Most of the jokes come from him. Like, there's this great joke where they meet the brain doctor, and that sounds weird, me saying brain doctor, but that's what they call him in the movie. And he's like, "Oh, I've been examining politicians." And he's like, "Oh, what did you find?" And he's like, "Oh, we found a contusion or something." It's like, "Oh, it's better than nothing." It's so great.
I also liked it because it gets to it was a nice scene where you show also how humorless Hartz is.
Right.
He doesn't pick up the fact that Gilbert's making this casual side about attitudes towards politicians.
Yeah. then there's another character in this that's the bad guy in Lady Vanishes. Yeah, so the bad guy in Lady Vanishes is Dr. What's his face?
Hartz.
Dr. Hartz. And he's got that same vibe of we trust him, and it has to do with the authority, but also he's just really, everybody in this movie is just really charming.
You also have, and this is another similarity, is that both of them are premised on a conspiracy. And so it is Hartz, the Baroness is a part, and you get that mention.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
So.
And so it's like who's that central figure?
Yeah.
And you assume, I think, early on in Lady Vanishes that it's going to be the Baroness.
Right.
Because she's the one who who's glaring at Iris, and then and it's a nice bit of misdirection that it's not her. And the comparison in Flightplan is that really, apart from the authority, the authority role that he possesses, I feel like that they tip it too early on that it is him. There's a scene like where she's searching the plane
for Flightplan. You're saying,
yeah, for Flightplan, and he's got that's and the air marshal has that kind of that Stanley Kubrick glare like this.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not the big grin, but he's got
yeah.
So, and you never get that from Hartz. Right up until the moment where he closes the door and starts speaking, you get, it's easy to see how he is not part of it.
Right. So, okay, this is an interesting thing for Flightplan. They combine those two characters of the companion and the bad guy. Mm-hmm. It's the same guy, the air marshal. And they do a great job of having him be charming, too, of saying jokes at the beginning. And we're on his side because of the authority, which comes from, like, the same with the doctor. Like, he's got that half of it. He's kind of both. And that's, for me, that's just great in economic storytelling. Like, if you can combine two characters, it makes it easier for the audience, and it's just more streamlined, and structurally it makes it more sound if you have less pieces.
Comparison is the question, and I may have already referenced this, the ability to deny the existence of the person who goes missing. Mm-hmm. And I felt that it was they had to go to greater lengths, and I think this is the difference one of the differences between 2005 and 1938, which is 2005 we're such we've become so obsessed with record keeping, we've become so obsessed with data collection, with documenting everything, that they felt like they had to go further into explaining that there is no record of this person.
Right.
And of course, that's part, I think, of selling Kyle's craziness, and you have to make that more visible in the plot than in 1938. 1938, there was no sense of, well, does she have a ticket?
They don't keep track of everyone on the train.
Then it's so much simpler. Do you remember her?
A simpler time.
Yes, you could argue that. Yeah, and I felt that was a point where it wasn't necessarily better or worse. It was just the difference between if you were to, say, bodily try to take Lady Vanishes and update it. And that is one of the things I think that makes Flightplan very different from the other remakes of Lady Vanishes, is that all three of them are set in the 1930s. It's as though what Flightplan is doing is just the first effort to take the underlying story or the underlying mechanism of Lady Vanishes and updating it for our times.
Right.
And in some ways it was I think successfully done. In some ways they had to explain some things because it is nowadays, how do you the fact that now you do have these manifests and these records that are kept, or maybe nobody ever said, well, why don't we look at the video footage from at the airport and see, because you knew that the stuff being recorded, you would see this person in the image. They conveniently never thought to do that.
Yeah.
So
the storyline is probably the most obvious of that's almost one for one. Well, I mean, the big beats are there. The stuff in the middle, they change up. But you've got the first act is a lot different, but they set up the same important mechanisms of they have the main character, the person that's going to vanish, and then they go into Act 2, person vanishes. And then they look around the plane or the train for the person that vanishes. Mm-hmm. The specific events have changed, but the midpoint is exactly the same. They play it differently, as I referenced earlier. One plays it for suspense. On Lady Vanishes, they tell you right at the front of the scene, oh, look, Froy on the window. Mm-hmm. And you're like, look at the window, stop talking about baseball, look at the window. Yeah. Or cricket, I guess. And then in Flightplan, they do it almost opposite of they don't let you see it until the very end of the scene, and that's the button of the scene. That's you've forgotten about the thing on the window, and that's the psychological thriller thing of you don't know. They leave you in a quandary of, is she insane? Is she not? You're kind of siding towards she's insane. And then she looks at the window, out the window, and she breathes on it, and there's the heart. Mm-hmm. And so they do the same thing, they just play it differently because they're really different genres. They're next to each other, but they function differently.
It also functioned differently in that in Lady Vanishes, Iris has an ally in Gilbert. Initially, He's kind of just doing it to humor her, but then he comes around to her way of thinking, and it really functions as a sense of that they are fighting back. They really, in Flightplan, isolate Kyle. That's
true, yeah. Even her companion character is a flight marshal that's just watching her and making sure she's not doing anything too crazy, and he's kind of a challenge character.
Yes. And the one who turns out to be the most sympathetic, which is Captain Sean Bean.
Yeah.
He doesn't really come over to her side until the very end. Until after everything has been done. So she really is so much more. She doesn't have that point at which the passengers rally to her side the way you do in Lady Vanishes.
Yeah, it's the opposite.
Yeah, she has to fight and I think it gets to that third act you were talking about, where she has to basically be Superwoman, and disarm the air marshal and misdirect him so she can sneak in and set everything set off the bomb. It's just Jodie Foster sells it because she's Jodie Foster,
right?
And she the establish in her backstory that she has the technical know-how to figure this stuff out. Mm-hmm. But it is where she ultimately, it's like everyone else has failed her, so she's got to do this herself.
Right.
And whereas at the end of the day, in Lady Vanishes, even though the other English people are being English idiots, that when the threat is too great for even them to deny,
they rally together.
Yeah, I mean the idea that somehow Iris and Gilbert could have, and Miss Froy could have made it out of there without their help. Once the switch of the bodies has been picked up by Hearts, it's implausible to see how they would get out of there without the assistance of all the other English people.
Yeah,
two of whom die in the process. So
yeah, that's a great thing. I didn't even recognize that. It's that really plays to the difference of the genre. You don't know if she's crazy or not, and it makes you think. And then it just isolates her more and more throughout. Yeah, exactly what you said.
Yeah. Which means at the end of the day, she has to be the one to figure it out, and that's where it gets to be a little implausible in terms of the parts of the act that we've already discussed that you're not as satisfied with.
Yeah. Then there's similar to the companion characters. There's also the henchman characters for the bad guy. Both of them have a female henchman. For the Lady Vanishes, it's the fake nun, and in Flightplan, it's the stewardess. They both betray the bad guy. So the stewardess, she runs out of the plane and just takes off down the tarmac. She doesn't want to be a part of killing a little girl. And that's basically the end of her. We don't see her again. But for the nun, yeah.
They do have her do a perp walk at the end. She's in handcuffs. She's
Oh,
being
that's
held
right. Yeah.
right before Sean Bean apologizes to Kyle.
Yeah. But for the sake of the plot, like
Yeah.
she's out of the picture.
Yeah, basically that's unnecessary callback. I mean, she's gone.
Right. And then the nun, she actually turns to help the good guys.
Mm-hmm.
And it's bizarre to me. I didn't see her motivations for like completely turning the other side. Maybe you saw.
Well,
her.
it's nationalism, pure and simple.
Oh,
The
okay.
moment she realizes that she's not, that this is not about the people of this country that she's only directly associated with, it's actual Englishmen. You begin to see her, and things. It's the part of Lady Vanishes that, I mean, I can see why it's there, and it plays to the elements I mentioned, but it is also jarring.
Right.
This idea that deception, murder, and you get the impression from a later conversation that this is not her first ride on the merry-go-round. She's done these kind of shady things before, but apparently it's okay so long as it's not an English person.
Yeah.
And that's when she has her crisis of conscience, which turns out it's for the best. And again, it plays to the theme, but it's not entirely sold in the story. I don't think. Oh, you're talking about the scene where she's talking to Hartz and the Baroness,
Right.
Yes, I do remember that dialogue somewhat. Yes.
Yeah. So
where she's like, and it's where you get the impression she may not necessarily be the sharpest pencil in the set. Where she's like,
Yeah.
well, and they're like, well, we're going to kill off all these English people. He says, well, you can't do that, and you can't kill me because I know too much. Yes, we know, and that's where she's like, uh-oh.
you see, I love the expression change on her face. It's so great. It's funny. Old movies, like you underestimate them, like especially like for comedy, like. And Hitchcock movies, especially, people go into those being like, oh, it's a Hitchcock movie, it's dark or whatever. He's got comedy laced all throughout this. Actually, I saw that this movie's listed as a comedy because it kind of is. It's a thriller, but it's also a comedy.
Yeah, and you get that from the first act with I mean, and that goes back to Charters and Caldecott, and then of course you have, and there's a scene we didn't talk about where, because the inn is so crowded that that they have to find accommodation in the servants' quarters. So
Right.
Charles and Caldecott are with the maid, and they're there's that English awkwardness. And Iris and her friends, they're in the butler's quarters, and so the men have to be flustered by the fact that in the case of Charles and Caldecott, it's because they're in this feminine space, and she's constantly popping in and grabbing stuff.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like they can't really hold. It's like their room isn't their castle because they have to concede to this. And whereas the waiter, whoever he was, comes in, and the Iris and her friends are just kind of being free spirits, so free spirited that Charles and Caldecott mistake them for Americans, and he has to awkwardly navigate around them and kind of and it's definitely playing on. It's definitely done for humor and not for any sort of part of the plot.
Yeah, Hitchcock's side characters are always there for humor.
And then you have the initial meeting between Gilbert and Iris, and in the hotel, in the inn, where she's trying to get him thrown out, and he just kind of brazenly goes in on her space, and that's where you start to see the sexual tension playing of Woody's kind of throwing aside her lingerie and everything, and it's again, it's done. He's not like threatening to assault her. He's just kind of
in that scene, I on first viewing at least, I started to think, oh, is he going to be the one that makes the lady vanish?
Yeah. I think it also gets to another difference is that you never get an impression in The Lady Vanishes that any of the English people are responsible for Miss Freud's disappearance. And this gets to, I think, the notion of us versus them, English versus the foreigners. Whereas in Flightplan, you really don't know, unless you've already seen The Lady Vanishes and or going in what's happening. You don't know exactly what has happened to Julia, who is behind it. It really is unclear as to who is the villain here? Is it a flight
Right.
attendant? Is it maybe the parents? Whereas, while I mean, individuals like Hearts, aren't he's helping out. You don't know if it's him. You do know it's some of these shady foreigners. So it's like early on, you have the suspects identified, and in Flightplan, it could be anybody on that plane.
Yeah,
For all we know.
that's to do with the first act. They don't, and I guess that shows why I didn't understand the first act is it's setting up all these side characters, so you know all the characters on the train. In Flightplan, there's so many people that it goes again to the size of the plane. But even with a normal plane, there'd be a ton of people.
And I think it also gets to a couple other things as well, which is one is the people you get to know in Late Vanishes are the English people, with
Right.
the exception of Hearts. You don't even really get to know the Baroness, and she's much more of a definable character in the novel than she is in the movie.
Who's the Baroness again?
She's the old lady who was in the cabin. Her husband was the minister of propaganda.
Oh, with the black
Yes.
shawl. And okay.
Yeah, and whereas in Flightplan, and this is, I think, is another aspect of it that is very 21st century, is the anonymity of everyone aboard. In a sense, while I had my issues with it, it is true to the sense of you go on these planes, you're in this intimate setting with hundreds of strangers, and you go off the plane and you know as much about them as you did when you get. Well, maybe you know a bit more about their body odor and their drink orders, in that sense,
It does capture that
yeah, it does.
experience.
I mean, you get to know the flight crew better than you get to know the passengers in that movie.
Yeah.
With the exception, of course, of the air passengers we're going to single out. We find out that they're businessmen, that they're, perfectly decent folk. But apart from that, I mean, it's just, angry Americans.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's what I had for similarities and differences on Flightplan.
Exhaust
I actually accidentally covered some too early. So if you want to hear some similarities and differences, go back there. Now we'll get into our ratings of them. We do a 5-star rating system here. So let's start out with Lady Vanishes. What would you give for your star rating?
Oh, unquestionably 5 stars. I mean, this is a film where I, had affection for it going into this this podcast, and my affection for it has only deepened. I appreciate things about it I didn't know, and I'm so glad I own a copy. So even if I can't get it on a streaming service, I can always return to it when I want to. How about for you?
Well, you kind of swayed me a little bit on it. I was going to give it 3 stars, but I have to think about it. Yeah, this kind of upturns the apple cart on. Let's see. I'll say with the caveat, yeah, I enjoyed Flightplan more, but I'll give Lady Vanishes 4 stars.
And I have to say that you did the same for me as well with Flightplan, which is
Cool.
That I went into I saw Flightplan.
Criss Cross.
Yeah, Criss Cross, exactly. I went into Flightplan. I started this podcast. For me, it would have been 2 stars.
Okay.
But I'd say after discussing with you and appreciating especially that while you have that similarities, that we are talking about the difference between suspense and psychological thriller.
Right.
And so I'd have to up it to 3 stars. I don't know if I'd ever necessarily watch Flightplan again, but I don't think I think I was unfairly dismissive of it after my first viewing.
Cool. Okay, I will give Flightplan 3.5 stars, and that was my original rating. I was going to rate it higher than Lady Vanishes, but it is Hitchcock. So, I mean, yeah. I don't know. My gripe with Lady Vanishes is there's just a lot of moving pieces. So it's kind of grating to watch a little bit, but they do everything they do really well. It's not my favorite Hitchcock movie, but solid 4 stars.
It definitely, I think that there are later Hitchcock movies that are more accessible.
Right.
And I not to mention you're dealing with some of the, I think a little bit of the technical jankiness of the British films in the 1930s. Sometimes the soundtrack isn't the best, and
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad I was able to, turn you around a bit on Lady Vanishes.
Yeah, same for Flightplan.
Thank you.
Okay. That's our first episode of Criss Cross Cinema Podcast. For our next episode, we're going to be covering The Prestige, which I believe, Mark, you've never seen.
I have never seen it. I'm looking forward to it.
I am also looking forward to it. It'd be cool if we could watch it together so I could see your reactions. But
Real quickly, what are we comparing The Prestige to?
it's just The Prestige.
Oh, we're just reviewing The Prestige.
Yeah, some of them are going to be single episodes.
Oh, I thought we were
Or
only
single
doing
movies.
comparisons.
I can't think. Oh, Prestige and The Illusionist. That'll be good.
There we go.
Okay.
Is it Illusionist the other one that came out around the same time?
Yeah.
Okay. Which fit in the category of two films I've never seen.
Oh, both of them. Nice. Cool. If you'd like to support us on Patreon, we'd very much appreciate it. Just go to patreon.com/Transcend Entertainment. That's TRANSCEND Entertainment. And that's it for the Crisscross Cinema Podcast.
But you wouldn't clap yet, because making something disappear isn't enough. You have to bring it